Hello once again, it is Andrew, and I welcome you back to the Revisionist Almanac, the show that gets into the time machine, takes a deep dive into a past Academy Awards ceremony, and determines what the voters that year got right, and more importantly, what they got wrong. We're going to roll back the clock further than we've done so far in Season 1, all the way back to a time of war, hysteria, and plenty of propaganda. That's right, we are arriving in 1942. And I have two very special guests along for the journey with me tonight. You'll recognize one of them since he's appeared thrice on the show already, and the other is making his Almanac debut. Please give the warmest round of applause to Tom and Dana Duncan, a father-son duo who hosts the greatest movie of all time podcast. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here.
You're very welcome. I have yet to outstay my welcome. It's weird.
It's coming at some point.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm now feeling like I know the 1942 Academy Awards better than I know any of them.
Except last year. Last year, you got to like 38 out of the 53 films.
Yeah, something like that. So
yeah, and we'll be doing it again in a few months for 1967. So yes, we're gonna have some fun. I have already finished prep for that, but that's for another time and place.
My predictions for that one are going to be rather easy for you. I know that you've telegraphed it so easily, but I'll let Dana try and figure that out.
Tonight's not so easy.
No, not at all. I just know for you, Mrs. Miniver will not be coming up very often.
Well, we will find out. So as a reminder, this show looks back on past Academy Award ceremonies with the luxury of hindsight to determine what should have won the Oscar for Best Picture, Best Director, and the 4 acting categories. And before we start things off, I hope you'll take the time to rate and review the channel on whatever podcast streaming platform you're currently listening on, as well as finding and following the show on every social media platform using the handle @RevAlmanac. Okay, so 1942. For those that aren't familiar with the year, the Best Picture winner was Mrs. Miniver. The film also has the distinction of being just the second film at that point in time, following My Man Godfrey in 1936, to be nominated in all 4 acting categories, and Mrs. Miniver was the first film to have a total of 5 acting nominations. It's also worth noting, because this year always confuses people, primarily because Casablanca is listed on IMDb and Letterboxd as a 1942 film, even though it was Oscars eligible the following year and won Best Picture for the films of 1943 instead. So if you're here looking for Casablanca, we will not be talking about that film tonight. Before we dive into the categories, though, we're going to take a moment and speak to the year as a whole. So this is always a great spot to kind of come in and hit me with some early hot takes, turn the temperature in the room up a little bit. So without spoiling too much that's coming later in the episode, what was your biggest takeaway from prep in 1942? Tom, why don't you start us off?
It's rather wholesome. I mean, it's hard to go back to the 40s and 50s without feeling some sort of like, oh, these are what your grandparents would watch, and aren't they really nice and cute, and everything works out in the end. They're not terribly complicated plots. Most of them are just kind of silly. Even most of the dramas somehow have like some love interest kind of sewn in there, and the only other real overarching theme is just how much Hollywood was trying to push our war effort and us to generally support. I think one of the films, was it Wake Island, had a specific tag at the end of the film, or like a credit screen that said war bonds now available in theaters. So you can definitely tell that this is the year following Pearl Harbor and our entrance into the war, how much it definitely affected what we were doing, but how much Hollywood had been taken over or recruited into the military effort by Washington, and how willing they were to do it in a way that I don't think that they were subsequently in any other war that we've probably been a part of.
And Dana, how about yourself? How did you take in 1942 on a whole prep experience?
Well, first of all, I've always felt that I'm like a lost soul. I always have felt like I should have been my grandfather and grown up and been in this time frame, because I've always had a kinship to this. But I think about it, and you have to understand the historical context. First of all, the film industry went to the White House and said, with the war effort, should we shut down? And, is this a waste of resources? And the administration, specifically Roosevelt, said, no, we need to keep our way of life going. And so I think in part the reason why the film industry was so patriotic is because they were charged with specifically saying, if you're going to keep filming when we're short of resources and such, you need to do your part to further the war effort. And that meant different, not just producing films that were patriotic, but that helped promote the concepts of why we were fighting and such. But it did emphasize to me, even in Mrs. Miniver, Teresa Wright's character, you never see a wound. You didn't see them bleed. Okay. And in fact, the first time they really showed graphic war film or war footage was when John Ford's film from Midway came back and was shown in theaters. And that had to have a special release because the Hayes board was limiting access because they wanted to edit it and take out the violence, the planes crashing and knowing that men were dying, etc. And the first time that they ever depicted a dead soldier was on Life magazine in January of 1943. So, of course, these films are sanitized. They have to be under that historical context. So, you're going to have two aspects of this. One is, yeah, rah, rah, we're fighting the Axis, and we're fighting to save our way of life. Or it's complete escapism. I don't want to think about it. And you have to understand the other part of this, which is by 1942, we had war plants going at full force. They started in 1940 with Lend-Lease and were at full speed. So those who were in the country yet had actual capital to burn. And so they had no problem going to films. And so, in fact, I believe 1942 is the most profitable year the motion picture industry had ever up until that point in time because of the fact that there was so much liquidity coming out of the Depression where people couldn't afford to go to the movies all the time. Now you could go almost every night. And so there was a hunger for films, and they were churning them out as quickly as they could. Even then, it was limited, but they were still churning out films right and left. And even though there's a common theme of patriotism in here, there is kind of a different areas. I mean, the Magnificent Ambersons versus Yankee Doodle Dandy versus Talk of the Town are about as different of films as you could conceive of in 1942, probably. I mean, there wasn't a lot of great effort to be artistic at that time, but they still tried to make attempts to be more unique. And so I think that's starting to come through. And I think that's a trend that started about this time and continued throughout the 1940s.
This has been History Lessons with Dana.
So I'll kind of, for the listener right now, I'll pull back the curtain a little bit. So we had an unexpected situation where we had an episode where we didn't have a specific year we were going to talk about. And so for this particular episode, I had my son, who's 4 years old, draw the year out of a hat. And we had all of the years from the 1940s decades. And he picked 1942, which Tom predicted beforehand as well. It's worth noting. So I'm going to preface this by saying, if you're listening right now and you don't know my take on movies, this is not a shot at older films or black and white films or films of that era, which I'm a fan of. However,
Here we go.
it's time for a little spicy take. Okay.
However,
so there are certain sections of the film community, and we all know who these people are, and they always like to say They don't make them like they used to. Well, thank fucking God they don't make them like 1942. That's all I'm going to say. Because this was legitimately the worst year in film that I can think of. And again, I'm not taking a shot at the 40s. I'm not taking a shot of that era in general. I'm just thinking there were so many heavy-handed, intentionally American-leaning war propaganda films with... after 30 films of prep with, I don't know, 70% of them being war-related, it felt like. They all kind of bled together, and there weren't enough films for me that really kind of stood up to that artistic level when I thought about it. And then I was kind of looking at other years in that era, and 43, 45, 46, it got progressively better. And so I'm not taking a shot at Hollywood. I want to direct all my venom at Hitler. I think it's all Hitler's fault for starting a war and causing the film industry to fall to shit, because 1942 sucked, and I'm going to blame it on Hitler. But that's my hot take, is I think this year stands out as the least skill. There was so little depth when you get past 15 films.
It's easy to blame him. They are the world's greatest movie villains.
That's right.
Yes.
I don't know. We'll talk about it more, but there were some excellent films in there. I just don't think there was a lot of depth at all. It was just a very thin year compared to some of the other years of the 40s, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain filmmakers that you're just not going to nominate, no matter what they did in 1942. Revisionist is not going to get nominated for an Academy Award in 1942,
and
no matter what she accomplished.
There were multiple directors that are prominent in that era who were making documentaries that particular year. In fact, multiple of them were nominated and won in a 4-way tie for documentary that year. But I think John Ford had a documentary that year, and another, I can't remember if it was Wyler or not Wyler, but Billy Wilder. There was another director in that 40s era that had a documentary.
Yeah, and actually, Why We Fight, which was done by...
That's it.
Why am I drawing a blank? It's a Wonderful Life.
Frank Capra.
There we go, Capra. Yeah. So yeah, it's like some of these great directors who surely would have made a fantastic film in 1942 if they weren't effectively being forced to make a documentary about the war. It caused the depth to be thinner, in my opinion.
So the movie that you were thinking of is
Why
actually
We Fight?
That's not the film that won this year.
Okay.
Battle of Midway by John Ford and Prelude to War were the two that won for Best Documentary, along with Moscow Strikes Back and Kokoda Frontline, some Australian news thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's continue the hot takes for a moment. So you each watch basically 20 plus movies for prep.
Yes.
What's the worst thing you watched over the course of the period of time? Anything stand out, Dana, to you?
I have no idea what the hell 48th Parallel was, or 49th Parallel. I mean, it's a film where the primary characters are Nazis that you're supposed to hate, and all the sub-characters are interplaying with them. It flipped it completely on its ear, and I had a hard time following along. It would just skip things, and you'd go like, how the hell did they get from here to here? Like, have you ever been to Canada? I mean, like, you can just go from here to here with, not any problem. It's out in the middle of the woods. I'm surprised I didn't get attacked by a grizzly. But I have no idea what that film was really about. And yeah, I guess I'll go with that one as my primary one. That I don't understand why it was a Best Picture nominee, to be honest.
Okay. Tom, what about you? Anything that really just kind of shit the bed?
So I will second the 49th Parallel confusion. I don't quite understand comparative to a lot of the other films, which I thought were much better, even the ones that weren't necessarily nominated for Best Picture. And there will be several of those in my overall list. But that was the second film that I had. The worst film I watched was the first film that I completed. So the first two films are like two of my bottom 5. The Palm Beach Story is asinine. It is weird. It is all over the place. I like Joel McCrea. I don't get that. Mary Astor is in there, and what? Like, I
Rudy
don't
Valley.
understand any of the characters. It makes generally no sense. So if that's my impression, because I think that's the only Preston Sturges film I've ever seen. Oh boy.
Yeah, you guys didn't name there were three that kind of stood out to me as they were all crap. The first one, Tortilla Flat. I was expecting something about Mexican food, and it didn't make me hungry, so I didn't like it. It was just not what I was wanting it to be. My Sister Eileen. Come on, Eileen. Couldn't you be a better movie? And The Pied Piper. The Pied Piper just, I don't know. It was boring. It put me to sleep almost. So Tortilla Flat, My Sister Eileen, and Pied Piper did nothing for me. Maybe you guys will speak happily about them later.
I have a surprise, but there was one performance in Pied Piper that I thought was exceptional and made the whole movie. Otherwise, I agree, it was boring. But I'll get to that when we're talking about our categories.
Okay. Well, does anyone else have another hot take they want to throw out before we start jumping into the categories?
Yeah, Veronica Lake. I had never seen a film with Veronica Lake. Now I had to watch two of them. Okay. And I was utterly amazed at how beautiful she really was. And I am even further amazed that she couldn't act her way out of a paper bag. I mean, and on top of it, the part that I found humorous is that she got into a big fight with Frederick Marsh during filming, and I'm trying to remember who the director was, but his comment said that the title of the movie fit the actress perfectly. She was deemed the worst player or actress to work with in the early 1940s, and it basically destroyed her career. Between that and her drug and alcohol addiction, which she would like disappear from set for a days or two at a time and such. But that's the one that I couldn't believe. Is just I had never seen her in a film, and boy, yeah.
I have some Veronica Lake takes as well. I'll save them for a bit. Tom, anything you want to get off your chest real quick?
Errol Flynn.
Okay.
My God, does he look like Kevin Kline?
No. Kevin Kline looks like Errol Flynn.
There we go.
I mean, I like Kevin Kline a lot. I think he's a wonderful actor. I kind of wish he hadn't semi-retired, but my God, every moment of Gentleman Jim, I'm just like, you're going to have that low baritone voice just pop up out of nowhere. Okay.
I'll have a social media post following this episode with a Kevin Kline, Errol Flynn side by side. We'll see what the people think.
I kept wanting to say every time Hedy Lamar was on that I was expecting Headley to pop up, but it didn't.
All right, well, I have a few more juicy takes. I'll save them for a little bit. But before we get into the categories, it's worth mentioning if Tom, Dana, and I agree with who actually won an Oscar for any of the 6 categories we're going to dive into, that selection will skip the online voting process and get automatic entry into the Almanac. It's worth noting that Tom's 3 previous episodes, we've had 1 automatic entry on each of those episodes. So we'll see if Tom can keep the streak alive tonight.
Yeah,
Tom, feeling good about that?
That won't happen. I don't have a single winner repeating.
Okay, well, we're going to list off what was nominated and won each category. Then we're going to wipe the slate clean, and we're each going to make our own nominations and our own winner selections. We've also written down predictions for what we think the other will pick, and when we get to the end, we'll see how each of us done knowing the other and what they were going to get. Tom, Dana, I have no clue what either of you guys are going to pick, so my predictions are total shots in the dark. Let's get over to Best Supporting Actress, gentlemen. Okay, so the actual nominees for 1942 in Supporting Actress were Agnes Moorehead for The Magnificent Ambersons, Mae Whitty Jr. for Mrs. Miniver, Gladys Cooper for Now Voyager, Susan Peters for Random Harvest, and winning the little plaster statue that year because gold wasn't used because it was wartime, of course, was Teresa Wright for Mrs. Miniver. Now, Tom, you're our seasoned guest at this point, so I'm going to have you start things off tonight. Who do you have nominated and winning in Supporting Actress?
All right. So there will be an audible shock at the end of this, but as you know me, I count down from my 5 to my 1 in the way that the Oscars probably should. They should have ranked choice voting and present to us who has been eliminated from certain categories as we go through the night, just to make it more interesting.
That's a great idea. I like that.
All right. Number 5, I have Mae Whitty for Mrs. Miniver. Somewhat of a lifetime achievement, but she is a charismatic actress that has popped up in many different things, including our episode of The Lady Vanishes on Gmote. So that's 1. Number 4, I have Susan Peters for Random Harvest. 3, I have Gladys Cooper for Now Voyager. 2, I have Alexis Smith for Gentleman Jim. And number 1, I have Agnes Moorehead for The Magnificent Ambersons. You will note that the winner, who I personally love, Teresa Wright, is number 6 on my list.
Wow. Okay. I for sure thought you had Teresa Wright winning this one.
I'll be honest, she's much better in Pride of the Yankees. And I think there was kind of this notion, especially with Greer Garson, I think could have been nominated, and she almost was in my personal list, maybe to tease ahead, but for Best Actress in 2 different movies that she was in. She won for, I think, the lesser of the 2 performances. But Teresa Wright also was basically, this is kind of the makeup for being also equally great and nominated in Best Actress, but won Supporting Actress because she'd been great in multiple things up to this point already and had 2 fantastic roles in this particular year. So let's
3.
split the category. 3? My bad.
Actually, yes. I'll get to that when I do mine.
Ooh. Okay.
So what was it about Moorehead that stood out to you for the win?
She's the only part of Magnificent Ambersons that I really thought actually was good. As far as, I mean, I love Joseph Cotten. Like, he wasn't bad, but most of the film doesn't make sense to me. And I know this is telegraphing it a little bit, but this is now the 4th Orson Welles film I have seen. I don't get it. What are the critics thinking? Like, why is he so outstanding? I don't understand why Citizen Kane is this like upper echelon film. I understand from a historical perspective why it's there, but it's not a great film. It's just not. It's basically a biopic about a fictional character. It has nothing endearing about it. Most of the characters are hollow. The guy's a tragic figure. If you want that, go watch Godfather Part 2. That's a much better film.
Please send your Orson Welles hate emails to greatestmovieofalltimepodcast@gmail.com. Keep those far away from me.
The trial, what was the other one we just did for the show? I think this last year. I can't think of it. Magnificent Ambersons and Citizen Kane. I just don't get it. I can respect what he's doing. Like, he has a high degree of quality, but his storytelling ability, I just don't get it. But she, at least, in her very minute ways, because she didn't have a ton of screen time. She had one really big moment. Like, there was an Oscars clip that you'd get, which is near the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
I thought was one of the more believable moments in the film, for me at least.
Yeah, I mean, she really doesn't show up for the first, 40-ish minutes or so. I mean, she, at least not with any prevalence. It's really the back half that she pops in and takes over.
I think she's in the 2nd or 3rd primary scene where she's just kind of like, we're meeting this character for 20 seconds.
Yeah.
It's like in the hallway and she's going to have some passing greeting. But outside of that, like, again, when you get to the back half of things, I thought that she was one of the standout performances. I don't quite get the Holt performance. And I guess who else is there to root for in this tale of tragedy? Okay.
So I guess
apparently
that might be
he just wanted to pick on all the robber barons.
That might be the last time Tom has anything good to say about Magnificent Ambersons tonight. We'll find out. Let's move it over to Dana now. So Dana, this is your first time on the show. Let's see how you do. Let's give us your nominations and your winner for supporting actress.
All right. 5th in my category, if we're going from lowest to high.
You do not have to.
However you like to do it.
I will follow along with my co-host. He's He's the seasoned veteran here. So I actually have a surprise one. I have Priscilla Lane for Saboteur as my fifth. I
Okay.
thought she did a very good job of going back and forth between being confused and being favorable to Bob Cummings in this film. I thought she did a nice job. My next one is the surprise one. This is the most redeeming aspect of um, uh, the Pied Piper, and that's Ann Baxter.
Mm.
I thought she did a phenomenal job. She was sympathetic. You had empathy towards her. She did a really good job of portraying her character. And while she was in the film, I found it entertaining. Before and after her involvement, I kind of went, okay, we have a crusty old guy and he seems to hate children, but now he's in charge of children. Okay, so I think I've seen this before. The next one I have then would be Teresa Wright. This did not stretch her at all. This was basically her crying a few places and going, "Oh, I'm worried about my husband." There wasn't much there. Actually, the film that was done the same year, but was because, again, this scheduling issue with how they changed what qualified or didn't. Shadow of a Doubt was technically a 1942 film, but it was
Okay.
not done and released, so that it did not qualify for the 42 Academy Awards. It missed it by a week.
Wow.
So I actually think that her performance in Shadow of a Doubt should have been nominated and won for Best Supporting Actress, more than likely, because she was much more responsible for the quality of that film than she was in Mrs. Miniver. The next one I have is Agnes Moorehead from the Ambersons. And for shout out for those of my age, that was Endora from Bewitched.
That's where I know her from most. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But having been a big fan of old time radio and listening to those a lot in the car, she was a part of the original Mercury Theater. And so Hollywood kind of looked down their nose at her when she came to Hollywood because she was a radio actress. Oh, how horrible. And the fact that she was even nominated was a shock. But then my number one, and the one who I think should have won, was Gladys Cooper for Now Voyager. Oh my God, was she frightening. She was like the worst epitome of what a mother could be. She makes every other mother look like a saint, even Joan Crawford. And so I just thought that she nailed that performance, and so I went with her as number one.
I'm sorry. I would put her against Angela Lansbury for Manchurian Candidate from '62.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Okay.
Evil Mothers, like
She's on the Mount Rushmore.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't fault the Gladys Cooper pick. I think that's a terrific one. I'll jump
Yep.
into mine really quickly, and then we can kind of cover if there's anyone else that we wanted to talk about. So I always give mine in alphabetical order by the film, so I'm going to do that here. I'll just list off my 5 and then tell you my winner. So my first nomination is going to go to Agnes Moorehead for The Magnificent Ambersons. Second pick is going to Teresa Wright for Mrs. Miniver. My third pick is going to go to Janet Blair for My Sister Eileen. The only reason I got through that movie was Janet Blair. Thank you, Janet Blair. My fourth pick is Gladys Cooper for Now Voyager. And fifth and final pick is going to go to Susan Peters for Random Harvest, which I thought she was really good in Random Harvest.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty chalk heavy. I've got 80% of the actual nominees getting my 5 spots. I thought overall this category was pretty dreadful in terms of depth. Tom, you and I feel like it's a broken record at this point. Supporting actress always just ends up thin because there's just women have just been always underserved in Hollywood, and it's really noticeable this year because the supporting actress category is just real thin. You want to say something, Tom?
Yeah. One of the few times I agree with you on the best supporting actress in this particular year because it's always been kind of underserved. but this is the first time I can remember that I think the Best Actress category is better than the Best Actor category.
Interesting.
Of the 4 years that I've done, I think this is the strongest one. And when you came on and you said they should make them more like they used to, there are a lot of really good leading lady performances, or at least like equal billing performances in this year comparative to what we normally get now.
That's a good point. I would agree with that sentiment. I do think the actress category in 42 is stronger than the best actor category. So I'll definitely agree with you there. But supporting actress, again, was a little bit thin for me. At the end of the day, it came down to 3. I had Teresa Wright, Gladys Cooper, Agnes Moorehead, all kind of in the shuffle. I think Wright is a very deserving winner. I don't have a problem with her winning. Like Dana said, Gladys Cooper is intimidating and terrific. I ultimately went with Agnes Moorehead. I think she's the best part of Magnificent Ambersons. And like Tom, like you said, I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen Ambersons, even though it's like 80 years old at this point. But there's a scene very near the end that is her Oscar moment, if you will. She delivers, like she's firing on full cylinders. And I don't know, because all I had known Moorehead for was her TV work on Bewitched. I guess I just didn't know she had this kind of like range in her, and she floored me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing from Agnes Moorehead in this film, because the movie's missing her for the front half, and then she comes in and she's just like this supernova that kind of takes over the back half of the picture, in my opinion. So Moorehead's going to get my win for supporting actress. And if I had to throw a quick somebody who just missed the cut for me was May Whitty and Mrs. Miniver. I just didn't think that Miniver necessarily needed 2 supporting actress spots of my 5, so I only gave it 1. Just personal preference.
Kind of similar to how I came down. I know that Teresa Wright, again, no offense to her, because I think she should have won an Oscar at some point. It was just, this is probably the least of her roles where there wasn't much to do on the page. She just kind of was a good actress, but it was a very limited role. So I went with May Whitty because at least there was more arc to her character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that for sure. Okay, well, do any of you want to throw out anybody else that just missed your top 5 that you want to quickly say a few words towards before we move on to the next category? I really don't have many else outside of my top 6 that stood out to me.
I may be preempting it a little bit, but since my father mentioned her already, one of the people that I wanted to specifically mention, because the other 3 that I had on my list as Grace Kelly nominees are all ineligible, but I have Ann Baxter as the one that I was going to throw out for consideration.
Okay.
Because I think, unfortunately, she was in possibly the worst year and the worst movie to be nominated for Best Actress, even though she's outstanding. Yes. But she was against Bette Davis, and I'm drawing a blank on Sunset Boulevard. And
Gloria
Swanson. And she just split the vote with all 3 of them. So it went to, I think it was Judy Holliday. That sounds right.
Which...
Well, I mean, I haven't seen that picture, so I have no idea. But
I've never been so bored in my life.
Just watch Tortilla Flat and get back to me.
Okay. Well, I love the book, Steinbeck, but I mean, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to see it. I'm going to have to watch it after we're done.
But I think she's one of the better parts of both the Ambersons and the Pied Piper. So if I'm going to kind of reach back out and say, let's do a makeup somewhere in time for her. I mean, because even in 1950, I'd have a hard time saying that she was better than Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson.
For sure.
This might be a good spot.
All right. Well, that's our supporting actress category for 42. So the voters are going to have 3 options to choose from. 3 really strong women, I think, that'll divide the vote a little bit. So you can either go with the Academy, who's got Teresa Wright and Mrs. Miniver. You can go with Dana, who had Gladys Cooper and Now Voyager. And Tom and I aligned on this first one. We both got Agnes Moorehead in The Magnificent Ambersons. So 3 options on social media. Before we get to the next category, though, I have a sneaking suspicion Tom might do what he did on last month's episode and bring a few trivia questions to the table. Tom, would I be right?
Yes, you would.
Okay.
Ah.
So a lucky guess.
I did tell you these were substantially easier than the 2014 questions.
So
it was harder to get trivia questions for this.
does Dana know these questions ahead of time,
He
or is
does
he going to be
not.
on my? Okay, so he's with me on this one.
Yep. It is all teased out. So
Okay, what do you
I'll
got
start
for us?
with a fairly simple one. Where was the 1943 Oscars held, and who was the host for the 4th consecutive year?
It's Bob Hope.
Correct.
And are you talking about specific venue?
Yes.
I don't think I know the specific venue it was at.
So it is a very famous venue for the Oscars. There's a plaque.
The
That is
Coconut
there.
Grove in the Ambassador Hotel.
Correct.
Was this the last time Hope did hosted the
no.
Oscars? Okay.
No.
He's got the record, right?
Yeah, he's got like 16 different hostings, and he
Mhm.
hosted like 3 more times by the end of the decade. But this was his last one, I think, during the war, because the next year was the overseas broadcast by Jack Benny.
Okay.
Well, then the 44 he co-hosted.
That might be.
So, anybody know what the Ambassador Hotel is famous for otherwise?
A salad.
No, it's where Robert Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh, that's right.
Okay.
I forgot about that.
Interesting.
And that's tying in, what is it? Well, I guess that's 68. I was going to say 1967. Ah, shucks.
Close. I was going to say Dana's our
Very, very
Kennedy
close.
enthusiast, so he's always got all the Kennedy knowledge. All right, well, let's jump over to the Best Supporting Actor category now. So, in 1942, the Academy that year nominated Henry Travers for Mrs. Miniver, Frank Morgan for Tortilla Flat, William Bendix in Wake Island, Walter Houston in Yankee Doodle Dandy, and the winner for the category was Van Heflin for his role in Johnny Eager. Dana, we're going to go over to you on this category to start us off. So why don't you give us your 5 nominees and who you got winning the category?
All right. I'm going to give you the 3 that the Academy nominated that I really liked.
Okay.
Van Heflin, for Johnny Eagerly. And I'll get to that. William Bendix did a nice job. Walter Houston, I thought, was probably one of the best parts of Yankee Doodle Dandy. And then I have 2 surprises. I have Alan Ladd for This Gun for Hire. I thought his performance was just borderline creepy. I thought I have never seen a sociopath performed as well in a film up until Sir Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. I was just floored by his performance, especially in light of, and I'll make this point too, Van Heflin and Alan Ladd in Shane was nothing compared to the performances in these 2 films. These 2 films actually required them to act. Shane was just kind of, I have no idea what Shane was exactly, other than just some trope that was thrown out and got popular for some bizarre reason. It's a good film, but the acting is not what carried it. And then for the last one, are we ready? Should there be a drum roll?
Ooh, I don't have the drum roll queued up.
Oh, well, hold on. Give me a second. Do.
I'm so curious what Dana's going to pull out of his ass on this one.
Ronald Reagan for King's Row.
Oh, no, you
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I have him in the Best Actor category, or not that he could be nominated for Best Actor due to my own private rules, but fair enough.
Okay. Well, I thought his performance was great. And it's one of those what ifs. If he actually was nominated for the role, would he have gotten better parts? Would he have foregone politics?
Probably.
Yeah. So, one of the great what ifs.
And is he your winner?
No, he is not.
Okay. You
Van
scared me,
Heflin.
Dana.
They got it right on this one. Van Heflin all the way. I mean, that character was just, I mean, I'm watching this and I'm going, everything I've seen Van Heflin in, I have never seen him act like that. He was just wonderful. I thought, boy, this guy is just, tortured soul, intellectual, who's, sold his soul for the money and the status and everything, and him drinking himself to death and everything about it. I thought his performance was by far superior. And I mean, there were some solid performances. I think this entire category could easily, if anybody said any one of these would have won that I nominated, I would say no problem. But I am picking this Van Heflin all day, all way.
Okay. Well, we'll go over to my nominations now, and then we'll circle back to Tom. We're going to have Dana and I have some very different nominations, so this will be a fun category. I will preface by saying Ronald Reagan pulled up dead last for me in my entire power rankings. I didn't get Reagan at all in this movie. Like,
that is not surprising. I spent most of that entire movie thinking, is he a good actor? Oh yeah, he's a good actor. Wait, is he a good actor? No, he's a good actor.
Yeah. Not
Okay.
for me. I respect the differing opinion, but Reagan he wasn't for me as a president. He's not for me as an actor, but that's for another time. Okay, so my nominations for supporting actor are Van Heflin for Johnny Eager. Everything Dana said is 100% true. Van Heflin just crushes it in the role, so he's got to be nominated for me. Joseph Cotten for the Magnificent Ambersons. He's not quite as strong as Agnes Moorehead, but I think he still pulls a lot of weight in that film. Third nomination is going to go to Laird Cregar for This Gun for Hire. I loved what I saw from Laird Cregar in that film, and what I saw in his overall body of work in the very short time he was an actor before his passing. My fourth nomination is going to go to Shuji Sano for the film There Was a Father by Ozu. Really love that film. Really love Sano, who plays the son in the film. I thought he did a terrific job. And then my fifth and final nomination is going to go to Robert Stack for To Be or Not to Be. Loved Stack in that film. Love To Be or Not to Be as well. Just a fun film.
Wipe that smile away, Pop.
Yep, I love it.
you wipe that smile away.
No, I won't.
Uh,
I have no idea what you guys are talking about, but I'm sure we'll get to it at some point.
Let's just put it this way. Tom was terrified of the
Unsolved Mysteries.
And Robert Stack's voice. And when that show would come on and he was about 7 or 8, he would run from the room screaming. Because turn off. And for a long time, if I just played the intro to Unsolved
It was so
Mysteries.
flippin' creepy.
Oh my god!
And then
gave
he'd
me the
appear
chills
out of nowhere in the mist. It's like, how do you want to set this up and terrify children?
Tom, if I'm not mistaken, you did not get, or you got to be or not to be, right?
Yeah, that was my fourth film.
Okay, yeah, I think he's terrific in it. But this is going to make it 2 for 2 for me, with really being on board with Magnificent Ambersons. I think the supporting roles in that film pull a lot of weight, and I thought Joseph Cotten was tremendous in the film for my take. He was just ahead of Shuji Sano and Laird Cregar, who were my 2 and 3. Tom, what do you got?
2 for 2, baby.
Okay, you're on it. All right. And I will say
I have not gotten my father right, but I've gotten you right.
I got Dana right for Van Heflin. I had a pretty good feeling he was going to go there. But yeah, big fan of Joseph Cotten. Don't have a problem with Van Heflin if he ends up winning when we get to the social media vote. He was a fantastic pick, and he was in my top 5. But Tom, let's go over to you to finish the category out. What do you got for us?
All right. For Best Supporting Actor, number 5, I have Van Heflin. Some of the best drunk acting you will ever see in a film. He was outstanding, but I ultimately went with some people that I just, either they were certain movie stars that I had an affinity for, or people that I liked. Anytime they show up, the movie's just ultimately better because they're in it. So maybe it's not based on performance, but just how much I like them and how much of a relief it was to see them in certain films. 4, I have Joseph Cotten for The Magnificent Ambersons. 3, Ward Bond for Gentleman Jim. Small bit part in the movie, but he is somewhat bombastic. He's comical, but he just plays the part very well. And the moment towards the end of the film that really it raised the film that I already was very high on and just gave it that little extra is when he comes back in at the end of the film to give him the belt, essentially, and be a gracious loser. That he shrinks away and everybody's just paying attention to the two of these great champions. One has bested the other. I thought it took it to another level. So his performance for me is at my number 3. 2, who was my number 1 for a very long time during this process, Paul Henreid for Now Voyager. I think he is a great compliment in that movie to Bette Davis. That is a very strong movie. Of the ones that really weren't about war, this is maybe one of the few that I thought was about something else and really invested in kind of a human emotional side of things that I wasn't expecting. So that one placed very high for me in this particular year. But number 1, guy who should have had an Oscar probably at some point. I know he was fussy and difficult to work with, but I have Cary Grant for The Talk of the Town.
It's hard to argue with that, yeah.
It's Cary Grant. How does he not have an Oscar? He is fantastic in that film, but he is not the lead. Ronald Colman is quite clearly the lead, and even though he has certain scenes, he's missing for probably a good half of that film. So at a certain point, he kind of has to be bumped down, even though he's probably the name that's the most recognizable and the top of the cast list. He's just missing for probably half of the film. So I have him in Best Supporting Actor, and I have him winning.
That's fair. He will show up as he's in my lead actor nominations eligibility, so he'll get mentioned potentially in that side of things. I'm with you on Paul Henreid. He was my number 6. It felt really tough keeping him out of my top 5 because Now Voyager, just as a film, I had not seen it prior, and it was just something that really kind of caught my attention. Kind of like you said, Tom, it stood out from the crowd in a big way where it felt like it was about something actually, and I appreciated just it for its difference. Also, Robert Preston in This Gun for Hire, I thought did a really good job. He was just below my top 5. Dana, anybody that just missed out on your nominations that you were impressed with?
Conrad Vliet for All Through the Night. I mean, everybody will recognize him if you haven't seen this film as being the Nazi officer in Casablanca. I just thought he came across as just the man you love to hate.
Now, one other question quickly for Dana. Do you have Cary Grant eligible in lead actor? Is that where you kind of classified him?
I thought about that. That's kind of where I had him. He just missed my list.
Okay.
And to be perfectly honest, when we get to actor, I had Joseph Cotten as actor, not as supporting actress or actor for Ambersons, because I loved his performance.
Well, we are all about category fraud and manipulation here, so wherever you want to stick them, it's fine with us. So,
okay.
Yes, I got a Dana. Okay, I feel proud of that. All right.
Well, I'm sure it'll happen a couple more times this week.
Yeah, I was going to say we have plenty more one-on-one, face-to-face time for sure. All right. Well, you're going to have 3 options again in this category, where you can go with the Academy and Dana, who sided together on Van Heflin, who actually won that year. You can go with Tom, who has Cary Grant in The Talk of the Town, or you can go with my pick. I've got Joseph Cotten in The Magnificent Ambersons. Tom, let's go back over to you for a trivia question, I imagine.
Before we do, because I wasn't asked, my number 6 was Shuji Sano for There Was a Father. I thought the 2 leading actor performances were the best part of that particular movie. I also liked Otto Preminger for The Pied Piper. I know he's kind of cartoonish, but it's one of the better, like, kind of villainous turns in the movie, even though he kind of has this weird heel turn somewhat in the film. And then finally, another guy nominated 4 times, great character actor. He's in several big movies that you can probably easily name, like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Casablanca. And he has the quote from Casablanca that my dad often repeats, but Claude Rains at number 9 for Now Voyager. I just thought he was too small a bit part in that movie to really put him forward of some other ones that I just thought were better performances, but great actor.
His best performance, as was Cary Grant's, was in Notorious.
Okay. I mean, that's hard. Mr. Smith
Mhm.
Goes to Washington and Casablanca, but I haven't seen Notorious yet, so I'll hold out until I've seen
Watch Notorious. I think it's one of Hitchcock's better films.
When does it come up on the Gmode schedule? Does it have an anniversary due
it will
anytime
not
soon?
until 2016, or excuse me, 2026.
Okay.
So that
All
would be
right.
the anniversary, because if I remember right, it's 1946, correct?
Yeah, it's post-war. It's
Yeah.
kind of a film about leftover Nazis still trying to hide out.
That'll be the same year or same season that we do Gilda for our recent guest, VP Morris, and former guest on this show and upcoming guest.
That's right. A lot of synergy going on there.
Shocking. But you asked for the trivia question, and I have a feeling both of you will easily get this answer since you were kind of half discussing it already before we started the record button. Which of the winners of an acting award this year set the record for speech length, causing the Academy to set new rules limiting speech lengths?
Yes. Go ahead.
Definitely old Greer Garson there.
Yes.
That is correct.
I don't think I tried to find it on YouTube. I think I found the full 6-minute clip. I think it clocks in right at 6 minutes thereabout. It's a wild. Can you imagine nowadays, like somebody trying to go up and get 6 minutes of talking time?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
All right, well, let's jump over to the Best Actress. That was a perfect segue right into there, Tom. So the nominees in Best Actress in 1942 were Rosalind Russell in My Sister Eileen, Betty Davis in Now Voyager, Teresa Wright in The Pride of the Yankees, Katharine Hepburn in Woman of the Year, and winning was Greer Garson in the film Mrs. Miniver. I'm going to start this category off this time for you guys. So here are my 5 nominees. First up, I have Anne Baxter in The Magnificent Ambersons. Anne Baxter is terrific in everything. I think she did exceptional in this film as always. I've got Greer Garson in Mrs. Miniver. Very deserving actual winner. I think she has to be in my top 5. Betty Davis in Now Voyager. Again, Now Voyager was a revelation for me. I just was thoroughly impressed with that film, and Betty Davis shone through in every way. Fourth pick, I guess this is going to get some ire from Dana. We'll find out. I've got Veronica Lake in This Gun for Hire. I had never seen a Veronica Lake film prior to prep, and maybe it was just that she took my breath away, and I couldn't. Like, she was just so radiant on screen that I overlooked some of the acting. I guess, but I could not take my eyes off Veronica Lake. She was just a thing of beauty. I just magnificent screen presence. So it was hard for me not to have her in my top 5, just based on she wowed me when she was on screen. And then fifth pick is going to go to Katharine Hepburn in Woman of the Year. Really love with Katharine Hepburn in there. I promise I'm not going to give a 6-minute acceptance speech like Garson on this one. But, I feel bad because I was really negative about her win in a previous episode this year. And I contributed to her losing one of her revised Oscars. So I'm going to come in with my winning pick, and I'm going to give Katharine Hepburn her flowers for this one. I think she was spectacular in Woman of the Year. She captivated me in that film. It was a film I had never seen prior. It really impressed me, and I think it's better than at least a couple of her actual Academy Award winning performances. And so I wanted to take a moment and say, if you haven't seen Woman of the Year, but you're a big fan of Katharine Hepburn, check this one out, because I actually think it's superior to a lot of the stuff she's more recognized for personally.
So you'd watch Woman of the Year again over, say, On Golden Pond?
Every day of my life. I hate On Golden Pond so much that I had a chance to pick it up today for 15 cents and I didn't grab it because I do not want to own that thing for 15 cents. So, Tom, let's go over to you and see where you go with this category.
With pleasure. So, number 5, I have Teresa Wright for The Pride of the Yankees. I think her superior role in this particular year. 4, I have Katharine Hepburn for Woman of the Year. 3, a name that we've mentioned on the Gmote podcast a couple of times before, and she was also the co-star of Alan Ladd and Van Heflin in Shane. I have Jean Arthur for The Talk of the Town. 2, I have Greer Garson for not Mrs. Miniver, but Random Harvest.
Hmm.
I think the superior of the two roles that she played in this particular year. But number 1, with a bullet point, one of the great actresses of all time, Bette Davis for Now Voyager.
Also a first-time watch for you, I believe.
Yes.
Now Voyager. Yeah.
Most of the films in this year were a first-time watch, save for, I think I got through half of Pride of the Yankees one time, and I had done Mrs. Miniver because I've completed all of the Best Picture winners at one point in time. And I'd also watched Yankee Doodle Dandy because I think that's on the AFI Top 100 list, either the original 1998 or 2007 Redux list. That was a pandemic watch for me, but I still found it just as pleasant this time around as I did at that time. But everything else was first watches for me. So Random Harvest, Now Voyager, Talk of the Town, Woman of the Year. And I actually found a lot of these films, especially the further on I got away from 49th Parallel and the Palm Beach Story, to be a much more endearing year. I'm just unfortunately sad that I didn't quite get to This Gun for Hire since you guys have talked it up so much. So that was one of the two I was going to go and try and watch on my own, even if I can't have them in my nominations.
Why don't you speak for a minute about Bette Davis in this film? What really captivated you and stood out to you?
She's got such a complex character. For someone who, I mean, I can't say that like my parents were mean to me or anything in that way, although my father was well aware of my difficulties with my mother growing up. The interactions between the child and what their obligation is to their family, specifically their mother, is quite fascinating. And so I really, I hate to put it this way, but related to the character a lot. As someone who also feels somewhat of like an ugly duckling waiting for their wings to grow, I've related to the character. And I think this film and the way it's contextualized could have been very obvious. With the way most of the other 1942 films went, you would think that she and Paul Henry would somehow find their way back to each other. But it's not that kind of love story. Instead, she kind of soft adopts his daughter and shows a kindness that she was never shown herself. And so the complexity to go from the opening where she's despondent and desperate to get out of her circumstances, then she progresses to this woman who's sprouted finally in her golden age to find love and to move forward and have this positivity and ability to kind of puff out her chest a bit to finally cast off the shackles of her mother quite openly, and then to show the love and tenderness towards a child. I just thought there was a lot of nuance in the performance for me that I found so engaging. And I just, once I saw it, I just locked her in that she was almost assuredly, unless there was just somebody else that flabbergasted me, going to be my number one.
Unlike Golden Pond, I was happy to pick up Now Voyager today for 15 cents. That was a well done purchase because Bette Davis she crushes in that film. Absolutely love it. All right, well, let's go over to Dana, and then we'll circle back on kind of some on the bubbles that just didn't make it. Let's see where Dana falls on this Best Actress category. What do you got for us?
I have Greer Garson for Mrs. Miniver, Bette Davis for Now Voyager, Teresa Wright for Pride of the Yankees. I have Katharine Hepburn for Woman of the Year. And my last is Carol Lombard for To Be or Not to Be. And I put her on both for two reasons. One, I think she did a really good job, in the Academy has a tendency to underplay the roles that people do in comedies. And two, the tragic circumstances, which is her death in January of 42 in a plane crash. It kind of put a pallor over the film. I never thought it got the publicity or the play it should have, and I think it probably did not get the recognition that year that it should have because of the tragic circumstances that took place. So that's what I did. And let's just put it this way. I had a very difficult, conflicting time because it's who do I think actually did the better performance or who do I think actually should have won it? Okay. Because they're two different issues in this film, in this category to me, which is when you look at the context and the history and the film and what was taking place, Greer Garson should have won it and did win it. Okay. But Betty Davis just did a better job. So if that's the way you define it, then it's Betty Davis.
I love it. That's a great pick right there. Well,
So I finally got one right for you there, Pop.
I thought you guys were both going to be locked in on Greer Garson for sure. Swerved a little bit on me there. Well, I'm glad Dana shouted out Carol Lombard because she was on my short list. Greer Garson and Random Harvest. Tom, I'm glad you said how terrific she was there. The other one that neither of you mentioned that I would quickly shout out is Olivia de Havilland in This Our Life. I thought she was really, really great in that film. She was actually my number 6. This category, Tom, you alluded to it earlier. I think I'm pretty comfortable saying it's like 12 deep, where I would have had no problem mixing anywhere between like 6 and 12 could have been right on the bubble for me. I would have been happy to put any of those women in there. It was a really good category. Anybody that just missed out for you guys?
Well, I had Greer Garson for Mrs. Miniver at my number 6, so she almost got a double nomination. Rosalind Russell, it's a spunky character. It's very reminiscent of His Girl Friday that she's obviously much more famous for. Ann Sheridan, I thought, was actually really good in King's Row.
Yes, I have her just outside.
And Ginger Rogers, in kind of a against type a little bit, the major and the minor, I also had at my number 9. So those are just a few.
Well, talking about bad films, that one was it for me. It made absolutely no sense, and it was almost nonsensical, and the ending was abysmal. And so even though I thought Ginger Rogers did a really good job in the film, I just had a hard time doing anything with it because the role was so unbelievable.
If I had to pick out an actress who I thought did really good in a bad film, I will say Simone Simon in Cat People. Cat People is fucking stupid, but like Simone Simon's pretty good. I enjoyed her in that movie, but what the hell is Cat People?
What, you mean a movie named Cat People is supposed to be good?
Well, you have yet to see the Natasha Kinski, Malcolm McDowell version of Cat People from the 80s?
I don't believe I've stumbled across that one.
Oh, you have to watch that one. And
well,
then you're going to say, why did I spend 2 hours watching this?
Oh, I'm sure it's better than Cats. I'll say, it's got to be better than Cats,
Release
right?
the butthole cut.
Yes.
All right, yes. Well, the audience is going to have a tremendous lineup here. I'm looking at it. These 3 actresses are going to be difficult to choose from. You can go with the Academy, who's got Greer Garson and Mrs. Miniver. Deserved winner. We all felt really strongly about her 2 performances this year that were both in that nomination area. You can go with myself, who has Katharine Hepburn in Woman of the Year, and the Duncan gentlemen have aligned on this category. They both got Betty Davis in Now Voyager. Really, really strong group of 3 right there. Tom, what kind of trivia you got for us?
All right, so Woman of the Year was the first Hepburn-Tracy combo flick. How many times total did they appear in a film together?
Ooh, man, I saw a list because I was actually looking for another question we're going to have on the back end of this episode. I had to look up stuff about people in movies together. And this one came up on the list, but I can't remember what the number was. I'm going to say 6.
Dead?
5.
9.
Wow.
Including
really?
A second one in 1942 called Keeper of the Flame.
Ooh.
Woman of the Year, Keeper of the Flame, Without Love from 1945, Sea of Glass from 1947, State of the Union from 1948, Adam's Rib from 1949, Pat and Mike from 1952, Desk Set from 1957, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner for our next episode of 1967.
I think I've maybe seen 4 of those 9.
I've seen 3.
Okay.
But they're a good combo.
Yeah, Very good combo. I just watched Guess Who's Coming in the last 2 weeks, and yeah, they're exceptional. I'll say that.
I will say that I was not enamored with Adam's Rib. I would much rather watch Woman of the Year again.
Yeah, Woman of the Year was really good. It's one of the few movies from this year I would actively go back and seek out for sure, just based on the quality.
I would definitely recommend it to other people. And I think a lot of the nominees, probably my top 5 when we get to Best Picture, I would definitely nominate to other people. Or not nominate, suggest or recommend. Excuse me.
Your grandparents enjoyed it.
That's not shocking, given that I think they would enjoy almost all of the movies on here, except maybe Cat People. Even they liked 49th Parallels for some reason.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so happy that to this point we've basically made it through 3 categories and we've kept World War II films more or less out of it by and large.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully that continues as a theme because there were a lot of good films that year, just once you pushed aside all the bullshit. Okay, well, let's go over to Best Actor now. This is going to be a very interesting category, I think. So the nominees that year were Walter Pidgeon in Mrs. Miniver, Monty Woolley in The Pied Piper, Gary Cooper in The Pride of the Yankees, Ronald Coleman in Random Harvest, and James Cagney won that year for Yankee Doodle Dandy. All right, Tom, we're going to have you start us off on this particular category. Who do you have nominated and winning?
This is the by far hardest category to predict for anybody because I have 20 people on this list and I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of them here. Like my father had William Bendix for Wake Island, I think, in supporting actor. I have him in actor because he's way too much a part of that movie to be in supporting actor for me. I don't know. All right, 5. I have Spencer Tracy for Woman of the Year. No real surprise there. 4, I have Ronald Coleman for The Talk of the Town. 3, I have James Cagney for Yankee Doodle Dandy. 2, I have Errol Flynn for Gentleman Jim. Number 1, I have Ronald Coleman for Random Harvest. That's right. Ronald Coleman pulled a double nomination.
I believe year to date, that's the first double nomination in a specific category on the show. So, Tom, I think you get credit for that one right there.
I love to be a trailblazer on this show.
What was it about his performance in Random Harvest that stood out as the exceptional acting of the year?
So, again, I like complex characters, even though it's simple story following. Like, the plot of Random Harvest is not very difficult to follow. But he has to play kind of a PTSD character for probably a good third of the film to start with. Then he's got to be a titan of industry. And then he's got to be kind of a lost puppy who doesn't know what he's going to do with the rest of his life after he's achieved so much now that he remembers who he was. So it's constantly switching identities and this lost confusion that he presents through much of it. I have to say, for nominating him twice, he is a revelation of this year for me. I really wish he was in more famous films because he is fantastic in both of those films.
Is there anyone that was just below? Like, who's your number 6?
I'll butcher this, but Chi Shu Ryu for There Was a Father. Again, I don't think it's a particularly good film. I don't think it's a particularly well-directed film, but the 2 acting performances are excellent. So I had them just both at 6 in both of those categories. I also thought Robert Cummings had a very strong year. I had him at my number 7 for King's Row and at number 9 for Saboteur. So a lot of crossover performances where a lot of people were in multiple films. So it wasn't as hard to find because I think this is the studio system. So you would go from like picture to picture to picture. But there were a lot of people that had multiple films in a particular year.
Now you have Cagney at 3rd on your list. How do you feel in general about him in Yankee Doodle Dandy? Do you have a huge problem with him winning the Oscar that year, or are you
None
generally
at all.
happy? Okay, I mean,
I like Cagney. In fact, this is the role that I really became fond of Cagney for. I was not heavily into a lot of his gangster films. I don't think Public Enemy is particularly good. White Heat's decent, but it's so cliche because he made it a cliche by that being like his go-to thing. It's like Robert Downey Jr. with Iron Man. Like it's so closely held to that particular character, you can't see anybody else. And him being a gangster is so, it is what it is. So when they
it's like
do something
ingrained in you
different,
now,
yeah. But that's Cagney for 5, 6, 12 different films. So to see him as a song and dance man, even though he probably has the vocal range of what's his name from My Fair Lady,
Rex Harrison. I was just
he
gonna
has the
say
vocal
that.
range of
yeah.
Rex Harrison,
Who had 5-note range.
Yeah,
who I
it's
just
not
had to
good.
watch for Dr. Doolittle for 67.
I'm a
Ugh.
Yankee Doodle Dandy. Yeah, it was his singing was not what you were there for, but his ability from a physicality standpoint to be a song and dance man. And I actually thought he missed his calling by being in a lot of gangster films. He should have been in con artist films because I think he's a very deceptive, smooth operator when he wants to be. And those are very endearing characters. The scene where he has the old man makeup on and he's talking to his future wife and kind of has her going through the whole thing, and then he's slowly taking off pieces of it and exposing himself, I thought was fantastic. It's one of the better scenes in that particular movie. And I wish he would have done more parts like this, but he has some other stuff that's against type, like when he was in Mr. Roberts that we covered back in our season 1. I thought he was also pretty great. So I'd rather see him in stuff that's not the gangster stuff, but I don't mind that he won here because he probably should have won at some point for being as big of a name as he was in his time.
Sure.
To not have anything. And I don't fault this. This is one of the few times that you had somebody cross over. It's a biopic that I actually didn't mind because I thought they did a little bit more with it. They kind of skipped over big sections of his life. They kind of just hit the highlights, but they made it entertaining. And the ending still does get me a little teary. So, but I ultimately thought Ronald Coleman had a better year overall, had a much more complex character. And I thought Errol Flynn's turn was just a little bit better, a little bit more charismatic for me.
It is funny. People always talk about like we're in this age now where biopics just happen ad nauseum, which they do. But like looking at 42, you got Pride of the Yankees, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Gentleman Jim. I'm like, was 42 like the first year of the biopic? Like it just feels like there were there were multiple biopics of that particular year that kind of stood out to me.
Gary Cooper won the year before for Sergeant York.
Yeah. It felt like this year had more biopics than I didn't expect there to be multi, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. People like to rag on 2024 movies for having too many biopics and this and that, but it feels like biopics have always just been a part of Hollywood.
Stage adaptations, books or famous novels that needed to be adapted, and biopics are like the 3 go-tos of Hollywood for as long as I can remember.
Yep. All right, well, Dana, let's see if you zig where we think you might zag, or if you're going to kind of stay in the range of where some of the others are. Who do you have for this category?
Well, as I mentioned, I had Joseph Cotten for Best Actor for Magnificent Ambersons. I had Ronald Coleman for Random Harvest. I have James Cagney for Yankee Doodle. I have Gary Cooper for Pride of the Yankees, but I will say that just about was eliminated from my list because I really didn't think Gary Cooper had to do a whole lot of acting at all. But the part was he looked like Lou Gehrig. I mean, he became Lou Gehrig. And in fact, I think a lot of people for decades, when they thought of Lou Gehrig, thought of Gary Cooper. So I had to put him on simply because he became Gehrig. And the last one I have may be a little bit of a surprise, but I was shocked. Frederick March for I Married a Witch. Again, a comedic performance that I thought he was outstanding in. And every time I've seen Frederick Marsh in a film, I am amazed at the level of the job he does and how little recognition he has in movie history for his performances. So, and actually, even though I think this is again one of these categories where who I thought had the best job versus who should have won. It was really close. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Cagney.
Hmm.
By the way, as a trivia question, who was originally supposed to play that role?
Was it Gary Cooper?
Nope. It was promised to him uh, by Jack Warner, and he reneged to go with Cagney at the last minute. It was supposed to be Jack Benny.
Oh.
And to this day, when you ever heard the intro to his radio show from the late 40s and 50s, Yankee Doodle Dandy is part of the theme song. And it's in his way, his little comeuppance at Jack Warner for reneging him of playing that part. Because he thought that that would have made his career as an actor in Hollywood. So, anyway.
I mean, he definitely would have nailed the role, as I'm thinking of him in that performance.
Well, and the thing and what makes Cagney's performance so good is the dancing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the singing, but it's the dancing. And I don't know how many people could have done the dancing and done it and performed it in the way he did. And that in and of itself makes it an exceptional role for him. And so I just went with him for that reason.
Was there anyone that just fell below the top 5 for you that you almost put in there?
I actually like Bogey in
All Through the Night?
Yeah, because I thought, again, this is a classic Bogart character that he just seems so smooth. He blended and fell within that and such, and just I was amazed. I'm always amazed because you think of Bogart as being a character, not an actor. And then you watch him and you realize he really was a rather gifted actor. His ability to portray the character and make it believable, no matter what was going on around it. By the way, as a shout out, anybody catch the two cameos that were, or in that opening scene that were in? There were 3 different character actors that were long serving.
Well, given I haven't seen the film, no.
Well, first of all, in the opening scene, it's William Demarest, who played Uncle Charlie on My 3 Sons. The other was Phil Silvers, who went on and had a huge career on television in the 50s. And Jackie Gleason.
Oh, wow.
Was in that film as one of the gangsters.
Interesting.
So.
Way to throw out 3 names that one people have actually heard of.
You haven't heard of Jackie Gleason. I mean, let alone.
That's what I mean. One of those 3 names people might have heard of, but you do not understand that the demographic of this show.
We're killing the young demo.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, we were doing that by doing 1942 to begin with, but my God.
No one's listening to this episode, thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
This is our
if you've made it this far, good Godspeed to you.
Yeah, right. I promise if you're listening right now, 1967 will be a lot more fun.
Well, it is a podcast, so it is available before 3:00 in the afternoon.
Easy listening with your early dinner.
Yes.
Let's jump over to mine real quickly, and then we'll finish things off. So my nominations for Best Actor are, I've got Errol Flynn in Gentleman Jim, just like Tom does. I think he's tremendous in Gentleman Jim. I've got Tim Holt in The Magnificent Ambersons. I don't think he's nearly as good as Agnes Moorehead and Cotton, but I think Holt still does really well in the front half of that movie. I've got Cary Grant in The Talk of the Town. Unlike Dana, I have Alan Ladd in lead actor for This Gun for Hire. I don't have any issue with where Alan Ladd's placed, supporting or lead. I felt he was more of a lead. And then I've got James Cagney in Yankee Doodle Dandy. I'll also say I didn't mention Gary Cooper because I thought coming into prep, I thought Gary Cooper would be right near the top of I thought he'd be for sure in my 5. And then I rewatched the film, which I hadn't seen in the better part of 20 years or more. And I forgot how little he's in that movie early on. And like Dana alluded to, he doesn't do a whole hell of a lot. It's strictly, he looks like Lou Gehrig and you're banking on that, and there's not a lot else going on. So it was hard for me to say Gary Cooper's a top 5 actor in this particular year, which is, again, not something I expected. At the end of the day, though, I do think there was a superior biopic performance, and it is Errol Flynn in Gentleman Jim. Tom, nailed that one?
Yep. I am 3 out of 4 for you, my friend.
The
lone miss I have was Betty Davis. So far.
Okay. She was right there for me. No, Errol Flynn, I'm a sucker for a boxing movie, whether it's Raging Bull or Ali or I don't know,
Rocky.
Great White Hope. Anything that's in a boxing ring is in my wheelhouse. I was like raised on Frazier and Ali and all that stuff, and so I just love boxing movies. And Gentleman Jim, I think, is a terrific, incredibly underrated sports biopic, sports film. Nobody talks about it. I think you can tell that Scorsese was influenced by it to some degree with Raging Bull. It feels like a movie he probably watched growing up, and I love Gentleman Jim. I thought it nailed the way boxing was so unique to that time period, where it in baseball were the biggest things in the world, and I think Errol Flynn was phenomenal in that movie. He just edged out Cagney for me. I think Cagney is exceptional, and I actually think Yankee Doodle Dandy is a better movie than I gave it credit for pre-prep. I had a lot of fun with it on a rewatch, which is not something I anticipated either. But at the end of the day, I know I'm not going to win a social media vote for Errol Flynn and Gentleman Jim because nobody's seen it, and Errol Flynn's not a name that people are going to gravitate towards. But I want to hopefully guide one listener to go check out Gentleman Jim because I think you'll like it.
He is exceptional in that film. He is such a smooth customer, a smooth operator. He's part con man, part immigrant, part boxing legend. It's a fantastic film. So I think it will be coming up again later.
There's a reason why the slogan in the 40s and early 50s was "In like Flynn."
Is that from Errol?
Yes.
Oh,
because
okay.
Errol Flynn was noted for his way with women. There's some question as to whether it was just women or not, but it was always kept secret in Hollywood. But also the fact that his career kind of hit some stumbling blocks when the studios had to kind of bury the ages of some of the women he was involved with.
Ah, interesting.
So he had a Charlie Chaplin problem.
Charlie at least married a few of them.
Is that somehow better?
Is that better?
It is if they had parental consent, I guess. But
I mean, that's just a license to repeat offend.
That sounds like a different conversation for a different show.
Yeah.
Dana's analysis of legal dramas.
Yes. I'll throw out Humphrey Bogart in All Through the Night was my number 6. Really liked what he did. And then Tom, you mentioned it, Chishu Ryu and There Was a Father. He's excellent in that film. There Was a Father. A lot of people know Yasujiro Ozu's filmography, Tokyo Story and Early Spring, Late Spring. Those are the films he's known for, and he grew into this really prominent director. There Was a Father's an interesting watch because it's front-loaded in his career, and you can tell the makings of a great filmmaker, but There Was a Father's just a little thin in the framework, and it's almost entirely reliant on acting, whereas I think Ozu's later films are much more interesting narratively.
There's so many time jumps in the film, and they're not sequenced well. You kind of get it only through exposition, so it's carrying a lot from either the script or the acting by product of just not knowing how to transition between what's going on screen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
I actually had to, it's very rare, but I actually had to rewind and rewatch a few spots in that film because the transition was such that I'm going, huh? Did I miss something?
It's jarring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really short runtime, but it still kind of drags a little bit in spots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I still can't understand what the hell it was trying to say.
Yeah.
Oh, I researched it because I knew there was something going on. And in large part, apparently it was based on a 1909 article that was written by Sigmund Freud about, honest to God, I got this, that's apparently where it came from, is about how the point where all children start to question their parents as to when they be, because as a child, you look at your parents as being like these deities. They know everything and they are all powerful. And then where is it the point in your life where you start to question whether your parents know a fucking thing or not? And whether they're stupid.
It's probably
And
about
then you
9 or
kind
10
of
for
come
me.
back on the other side. And that film is really what it's portraying, which is he's questioning what his dad's decisions are. And then later on, he comes around to thinking, well, maybe my dad wasn't as stupid as I thought.
Okay, if you had Sigmund Freud references on this episode for your bingo card and you made it this far into the episode, you almost deserve.
You get a Gmode hat.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just, when I don't understand something, I spend some time going into it, and I spend about a half hour, 45 minutes reading analysis articles. There are a ton of them on the internet.
And you have to show us a live video with your bingo card in order to prove it. We don't give out those Gmode hats for nothing.
Yeah.
I got to start doing bingo cards every episode now. That's a whole new layer of content I guess I have to come up with, Tom. So thanks for that.
You're welcome. I'm sure that'll be a great Instagram post for you.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, for the listeners of this episode, they're going to have 3 options in this particular category. Not the options I was expecting beforehand, but some fascinating ones. So you can go with my pick. I've got Errol Flynn in Gentleman Jim. You can go with Tom, who has Ronald Coleman in Random Harvest. And then Dana and the Academy have sided together with James Cagney in Yankee Doodle Dandy. Tom, do you have a trivia question before we segue into the next section?
Oh, of course I do.
Okay.
During this Academy Awards, which famous songwriter presented himself the Oscar for Best Original Song?
Did White Christmas won, right?
Yes.
Irving Berlin?
Correct.
Okay. Team effort there from Dana and myself.
Yep. From Holiday Inn.
Interesting. I don't think I'm familiar with Holiday Inn. I didn't get around to it.
I think I've seen it once. If I remember right, it is a Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire movie. Oh, no, I guess it's, nope. Fred Astaire, Marjorie Reynolds, and Bing Crosby.
Yeah.
So I think I saw it during the pandemic because my sister wanted to watch it. It was okay.
All right, well, now that we've got the 4 acting categories down, let's quickly turn to our honorary awards we hand out every episode. The Grace Kelly and John C. Reilly Awards. Again, these are given to an actress and an actor who had a strong overall body of work for a given year, even if they didn't necessarily have the single best performance. But I also wanted to mention an honorary award at the actual Academy Awards ceremony in this particular year that I stumbled across. I wonder if either of you guys saw this in research before. I'm just going to say Charles Boyer, famed for his performance in Gaslight, which, shameless plug, I happened to do a Gaslight episode on Gmode a few months back. He was given an honorary award for progressive cultural achievement in establishing the French Research Foundation, which is something I was not familiar with.
In Los Angeles.
And so Charles Boyer got an honorary award, and I just thought, what a wonderful, every episode of podcasting, I feel like all of our little podcasting webs get a little bit tighter together. And I just thought it was kind of funny that I stumbled across the Charles Boyer honorary award after doing the Gaslight episode with you guys.
So the producers are often the ones who are awarded for Best Picture. And so Sidney Franklin ended up getting the Oscar for Mrs. Miniver. He also took home the Thalberg Award, which was just another honorary award that they basically did to give awards to all the studio heads at one point in time or another. Yay, you're a humanitarian.
Just handing it out amongst each other.
You weren't terrible this year. Your casting couch was
you,
only so
you had
long.
the least number of actresses on the couch this year.
Yeah, precisely.
All right. Well, before I give my honorary awards, Tom, you always like to have a little game
Oh,
at
I
this.
do.
So let's see if you can. You haven't had much success in getting the actual person correct. So we'll see if you throw out Liam Neeson again or not this year.
Unfortunately, Liam Neeson was not eligible for being cast in this, but I already gave you Ann Baxter, which was the only one that I really had as a Grace Kelly nominee. The other ones are ineligible. Greer Garson, Teresa Wright, Katharine Hepburn were not eligible in this particular year, so I had her. As far as the John C. Reilly Award, for consideration, I have William Bendix as my number 6 for Woman of the Year in Wake Island, Robert Cummings at number 5 for Kings Row and Saboteur. I have Spencer Tracy, who is obviously ineligible because he, as another trivia question might have, like Tom Hanks, is the only recipient in back-to-back years of the Best Actor Award. I have Ward Bond for Gentleman Jim and 6 other films that year. That's just ridiculous. I have Claude Rains at number 2 for Now Voyager, Kings Row, and technically Casablanca. And I also have Ronald Coleman as my number 1, which is not saying much given that I nominated him as my number 1 and had him for 2 nominations in Best Actor. But,
well, where would Teresa Wright fall in that, since she should have had 3?
well,
Shadow of a doubt.
she can't. She's ineligible because she won a real-life Oscar.
Ah,
Yeah,
I
so
did mention her, but I said that
was
she's
that the year
ineligible.
before? Did she win in 41? No.
No. This is her
That
only
year.
Oscar.
Okay.
She wasn't even nominated for Best Years of Our Lives, which I think is a much worse.
Great. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let me clarify that. Is a much worse crime that she was not nominated for that movie as
I knew what you
opposed
meant.
to nominated for this here, but that she should have won for that year as opposed to Mrs. Miniver, in this humble opinion.
Yeah, you definitely got the names of a lot of the people who I had on short lists, but like you said, a lot of them just were ineligible for this particular category because they already had a lot of real life Oscars. Grace Kelly Award, I'm going to give it to Veronica Lake. Again, I might get an eye roll from Dana, but that's okay. I had honestly, she was the only person on my list who didn't have an Oscar, so she was basically the winner by default. But I liked her in I Married a Witch. I liked her in This Gun for Hire. I just, her beauty stood out to me in such a way that I couldn't not talk about her a little bit.
You need to watch Sullivan's Travels, Dad.
Yeah. So we need to keep you away from small blonde bombshells.
Yes. Not that I crossed too many of them in St. Louis, Missouri, but
okay.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Everybody sees something that others don't.
I found.
Wow, was that a face? Could we capture that?
That'll be the
right by
the
itself.
screenshot. Yeah.
Oh man.
I don't know. I guess maybe
She's beautiful, but I'm sorry, I just
found
don't
her
see her
mysterious.
acting.
In the same week, you're gonna harp on Grace Kelly and Veronica Lake. Next, you're gonna be harping on like ScarJo.
Okay.
Yeah, so Veronica Lake, I think she's really great. My pick for the John C. Reilly Award is going to go to a gentleman who I gave a nomination to. He didn't get my win. It's Laird Cregar. He was in This Gun for Hire, and he was in The Black Swan, which is a pirate film I was forced to watch at the very end of prep, which I'm not thrilled about. But I think, so he passed away at 31 in 1944. He had complications from binge dieting undertaken to try to get him into a leading man role. He had 16 film credits over his 5 years. I just think everything I've seen Laird Cregar in, he has this incredible screen presence, and I wanted to recognize him for, had he not passed away at 31, I think he would have made some really tremendous choices throughout the 40s into the 50s. I would have been really interested to see what Laird Cregar would have done with his career. So I wanted to kind of take a moment and just recognize somebody who passed away a little too soon. So Laird Cregar gets some love from me. Tom, no complaints with that?
Given that I didn't watch either of the films that you nominated him for, and I thought I had several people that were equally deserving, but okay.
Get back to me when you watch Laird Cregar in This Gun for Hire. I think he's wonderful.
Well, that's fine. I
pass on the Black
okay.
Swan.
But I still don't understand passing over Ann Baxter. But okay.
I need to watch Tortilla Flats simply because I have yet to see a Hedy Lamarr film.
You still have to pause every time you
pause,
say it.
make sure I didn't say it wrong.
It's Headley.
Yes. But she did not extend into Hollywood very much because she got involved in other things during the war, including coming up with a system that she invented for radio communications that she patented and held the patent on for a long time, which, if you were not aware, is actually the basis for cell phones and Wi-Fi.
Did you know?
Yeah. Okay.
Dana's just got so much knowledge just built up in that brain up there.
You
it's
knew
amazing.
what you were getting when he signed up for this episode.
All right, well, let's jump over to the director category now. Chock full of a ton of excellent directors. I'm excited to see where we go on this one. So again, as a reminder, the directors nominated in 1942 were Sam Wood for King's Row, Mervyn LeRoy for Random Harvest, John Farrow for Wake Island, Michael Curtiz for Yankee Doodle Dandy, and William Wyler won the Oscar for his achievement on Mrs. Miniver. It's notable for Wyler because it's the first of his 3 directorial wins, the other 2 being Best Years of Our Lives and Ben-Hur. Wyler was also the first person born in the 20th century to win for Best Director. He was 40 at the time of his win for this category. So, Dana, we're going to go over to you to start us off. Who do you have nominated and winning in Director?
I tried my best to deviate from the Academy on this category. And I'll be honest, I just couldn't. Because once you get beyond these 5, I didn't think that there was anything overly wonderful about the directing of any of these. The possibility I would potentially go just outside. I really like Saboteur, and being a big Hitchcock fan, I think Hitchcock just fell outside. So I have no problem with William Wyler, Sam Wood, Mervyn LeRoy, John Farrow, or Michael Curtiz. And quite frankly, in thinking about it and such, boy, I like Mrs. Miniver and William Wyler's job, but I think I'm ultimately going to go with Mervyn LeRoy for Random Harvest as Best Director. Simply because the film itself was less impactful at the time. I think in part Mrs. Miniver was a big love fest for, we're going to stand together and withstand the Blitz. And I don't think there was as much critical fly-specking of the film as there could have been. So I ultimately was surprised. The beginning of Random Harvest compared to the middle and ending of Random Harvest is much different. The first half hour of Random Harvest, I thought it was not going to be a film I was enjoying. But as it got to the middle and the ending, it was much more enjoyable and much more poignant. And I think a large portion of this obviously is Ronald Colman, but I also believe that Mervyn LeRoy, in the way that he was able to set the pacing, especially, it seemed to improve as time went through. I'm giving it to him for Best Director.
Okay. Not the way I thought. I thought for sure you were going to go William Wyler. Tom, where did you think Dana was going to go on that one?
Alfred Hitchcock.
Okay.
I'll be honest, there are not a lot of directed films in this year. I thought it was very simplistic. It was set the camera, shoot. And you could not see a lot of stylistic differences. One of the few standouts, and the thing that really stood out to me from Saboteur, is just the vision and the visuals. I've talked often about how Hitchcock will set up a scene with the suspense and the rest of it. There's a scene in the middle of the movie where he goes to the blind cabin dweller, the guy who's the uncle of the supporting actress. And you can tell when he's got his handcuffs underneath the table, there's a setup to that. And then he keeps cutting away and cutting back and forth until she kind of realizes it. And then he does something that I can't understand why modern directors don't do it, because it's known as spiking the lens. It's staring straight down the barrel, but he has in every movie that I think I've ever seen of his, somebody that stares straight down the barrel so that it's like you peering into their soul of what's going on in their mind at that one point in time, and the reaction shot from that, I think, is tremendous. I don't understand why more people don't try and go to that, because it is such an effective trick of his that he uses all the time.
Well, Dana throw you way off on that one for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
most definitely.
Maybe Hitchcock will come up for you when we're going to go to you at the end. We'll jump to mine next, and then we'll get around to you and see if you can give Hitchcock some love at the end. So here are my nominees for director in 1942. I got some strange ones for you, so we'll see what you think of these. First up, I'm going to go Michael Powell for 49th Parallel. 49th Parallel is a weird movie, but I think he directed it in a really fascinating way, and I think the directing kept me interested in the film. I'll say that. I was interested in what was happening almost exclusively by what was happening with the camera and the directing of that movie. So I'm going to give Michael Powell a shout out. Obviously, Powell went on to do much superior work with Pressburger. You know, and there's Powell and Pressburger have much better stuff, but I thought 49th Parallel was really good. Raoul Walsh for Gentleman Jim, I think, has to be in there. Again, Gentleman Jim is just a movie that I think was ahead of its time in a lot of ways, and still hasn't really found an audience that's appreciated what it is in the genre of the sports film. And so if you like sports movies, if you like boxing movies, you have to see Gentleman Jim. And Raoul Walsh, excellent director there. Orson Welles for The Magnificent Ambersons. I think what he does with that movie is really revolutionary. My fourth nominee is going to go to Yasujiro Ozu for There Was a Father. Again, I already mentioned, I don't think it's anywhere near Ozu's best film, but I do think he does enough with the movie, and he obviously has a hand in the actors that are what they're doing on screen, and so I wanted to give Ozu some love. And then my fifth nominee is going to go to Frank Tuttle for This Gun for Hire. I really like what Frank Tuttle did in that film. I can't say I'm a huge fan of Frank Tuttle's work at large in terms of like considering him an all-time great director, but I thought This Gun for Hire, he did some really interesting things there. This one, though, for me at least, it's all about the greatest, one of the most important, one of the most influential directors in film history. Tom, I don't care what you say about him. I think Orson Welles is terrific. I think the backstory on Ambersons is crazy. If you don't know about it, I would highly recommend checking it out. The studio completely gutted everything Orson Welles had sort of had as his vision for the film. But if you watch the movie, the stuff he's doing with tracking shots and the way he's the party scene early in the movie, just the movement of the camera and the actors, there's so much happening that Orson Welles was so far ahead of his time. And it's still mind-blowing to me when I think about the fact he's 27 at the time of Ambersons. He's even younger for Citizen Kane. The idea of a 20-something-year-old person doing this blows me away. We won't cover 1941 for a while, so I'll leave my Citizen Kane thoughts at the door right now. Might address that later. But I'm going to go Orson Welles for my revised Oscar because I think it's not entirely his fault that the movie got butchered. And I think there's still enough of Orson Welles' directorial greatness in The Magnificent Ambersons that I think it shines through and it stands out to me. So I'm going to go Orson Welles there.
It was packaged with Lupe Velez's movie Mexican Spitfire Sees a Ghost
Oh my
when it was
God.
released. Because RKO had so
You
little
got to talk into
confidence.
the mic, Dad.
Because RKO had so little confidence that it was going to actually sell tickets.
Oh, I mean, I have the Criterion of Ambersons, and there's some tremendous stuff on there about the studio middling with it and getting in the way of it, and Orson Welles he went down to Brazil, and there's just some fascinating stuff there. But yeah, Magnificent Ambersons, Orson Welles. I'm sorry, Tom. I think Welles was ahead of his time. I think he's an obvious pioneer. I think there's a direct line from him to some really interesting ahead of their time directors of this day and age. It's hard to talk about the history of film and not talk about Orson Welles in the 40s.
I have respect for him, but I don't get it. I don't see it. I don't know what everybody else does.
I had this very conversation with your mother because she watched it with me last night, and she's like, I don't know what that was. I didn't enjoy it. I thought it was boring and stupid. And I said, I don't know. I thought it was good. I enjoyed it because it was the story of, multiple wealthy, influential families who lose everything because of lack of thrift, arrogance, um, stupidity, malfeasance, however you want to say it. And that's, and we started talking about how she never had to deal with the same things I did in college, which she went to a state school. I went to a private college, and I saw kids that were uh, that level of entitled, and it changed my perspective of life. So it connected with me. So, and I thought it
And
was
yet
a
you
well done
have
film.
like one nomination. I guess Joseph Cotton is a second nomination. You have 2 nominations. You didn't even make it to director on this one.
No, because I don't think it's even close to Wells's best film. I like Citizen
Okay.
Kane. I mean, so
What
I don't know.
difference does that make? I mean, Steven Spielberg could be nominated for almost any film that he's ever made.
True.
That's
I
okay.
mean, Alfred Hitchcock probably should have been nominated 12 times.
Yeah, he fell right outside the category for me. But yeah, I like it better than you do, Tom, by far.
Well, that's for damn certain.
Ambersons as a whole is just such a hard conundrum of a film because you can't put aside the fact that it's not what it could have been, should have been, whatever. It's a weird conundrum. It's a unique case of a film, and it's confounding. But I had to get Welles in there. I just thought there are so many moments in there, regardless of whatever and Robert Wise, who was the editor on the film, whatever he did in the final cut, it was still primarily what Welles shot. And regardless of how they wanted to splice it together in the end, which didn't completely come together cohesively, you see it and you're like, okay, Welles was doing so much different with the medium at the time, in my opinion, that it's hard to overlook his achievement as a director. Again, in his 20s, like the fact that a 25, 27-year-old person is shaking up the industry in such a way is just so unique, and he's one of one.
Andrew, let me ask you: do you know if the original version is available someplace? Because the original version was like 2.5 hours.
So the original version, the parts that Welles did and tried to cut himself got burned. So they never released anything. And the only ability to see his original vision is through somebody else recreating his work through his notes. There was somebody that adapted, I want to say in the early 2000s, a version for like TV where they just recast the entire set of parts. And he had detailed notes on how to shoot everything, the sequences he wanted, the scenes, the rest of it. And they took his notes and did a shot for shot remake based on his notes. So that's the only thing that exists of his version of the movie.
Yeah, according to some of the scholars on the Criterion DVD, on some of the bonus features I was watching, the studio decided they wanted to make space in their buildings, and they literally took the original films and threw it in the ocean is the story, which is just fucking. It's hard to process that would happen. And I think it was in the late 70s or early 80s, Peter Bogdanovich tried really hard to sort of get a bunch of directors together to go digging through the studio to try to find a copy. And it's sort of become, for a lot of these directors, like the holy grail of movies. If somebody could ever like find the original Magnificent Ambersons in the 131-minute format or whatever. But as far as everyone understands, it's lost in time at this point. So reportedly, I think they shipped Wells the 131-minute cut down to Brazil when he was living down there, and it maybe got lost in South America somewhere. So there's maybe still like this original somewhere out there in the world, and we'll stumble upon it, but I doubt it.
So Juan Valdez comes in with a donkey and baskets full of coffee beans, and there's a film canister sitting on top. And...
Yep, pretty much, yeah. All right, well, Tom, let's. We know Orson Welles is not coming up in your 5, but
he's my number 10.
Okay,
he is my number 10. All right, number 5, I have a name that's come up already, but Mervyn LeRoy for Random Harvest. 4, I have George Stevens for The Talk of the Town. 3, I have Raoul Walsh for Gentleman Jim. 2, I have Alfred Hitchcock for Saboteur. And number 1, I have Irving Rapper for Now Voyager.
Wow, okay. So Voyager really connected with you, for sure.
Yes, it did. Very much so. I often, and you'll notice this from among a lot of my picks, is where certain movies have crossover among a lot of different things. There's usually not like one strange nomination and like this one standout performance gets one nomination that just kind of sneaks in and maybe has a winner. It's usually that like my winners and my nominations all come from about 5 or 6 different films. Mm-hmm. And I just like similar performances across all of them. And so I figure out how to pair all of those things. But yeah, Now Voyager I thought was the most emotionally profound movie, even though I don't think it had quite as much visual direction. It was getting a lot out of its actors, and I thought, a combined cast, as well as the set changes and the amount of things that were going on in the film, and to track it for, even though I don't know what the exact time period is, like it could be a year, it could be multiple years. I don't know how long the interval from beginning to end of the film actually is, but it feels like it could have taken place over multiple years or multiple months. And I think they do make reference to it slightly within the film, but you just kind of lose yourself into what it says about humanity, about parenting, about the love of children. So there was a lot for me emotionally that I invested in the film. And so because of that, usually the one that's the most emotionally connective for me tends to get pretty high on my list. I have him as my winner.
Okay, well, you got something to say, Dana?
No, you can tell exactly how long of a time frame it was, because when Paul Connery starts talking about his daughter earlier in the film, she's 7. And by the time she meets up with Bette Davis later in the film, she's 12. So it's 5 years.
Well, and then there's probably a good year where she's living with her.
Yeah. So you're talking 5 to 6 years.
See, I wanted to say there was a different time frame in that, but okay.
Now, none of us picked William Wyler as our winner. I think he's a goated director at this point. It's hard to argue with that. I mean,
yeah.
On the Gmote Director Pantheon, which everyone should check out, shameless plug to you guys, he's on tier 2 on your Pantheon. He's alongside Chris Nolan, David Lean, Coppola, Capra, Ford, Tarantino, Leone, Lumet, Kubrick. Hell of a tier you've got William Wyler on right there. I don't know about you two, but I think that Wyler has at least 5 other better films than Mrs. Miniver. Best Years, Ben-Hur, Roman Holiday, Friendly Persuasion, Detective Story would be the 5 that would come to mind. Above it, I don't think he's doing anything groundbreaking with Miniver. And so if you're a listener right now and you're going to see these options, I know Wyler has, sort of a name in, director greatness. I don't think Mrs. Miniver is anywhere close to his best work. Do you guys disagree at all?
No, it's pretty plain. I think it's emotionally wrought towards the end of it. He brings it home. And so you can see why it was the crowd favorite of that particular year, especially with the way it kind of ends, both with the flower competition and then going to that, but then it ends on such a sour note with Henry Travers's character passing away, with Teresa Wright's character passing away. Then they have that really emotional finish in the church, ascending into the heavens as kind of a representation of things. But it's still, there's a good section of this movie that just feels really slow and
Mhm.
kind of pandering to a bit. Now, I say that obviously with the benefit of hindsight, but at the time, it's not hard to see why this was like the runaway favorite of that year.
For
I
sure.
just now looking back on it, it's like, really? Does it really have all that much profound to say, or was it just like in the moment this was the thing?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. What about you, Dana? Do you think it's Weiler's anywhere near his best stuff?
No, and in fact, I would say I would create my own new category or new award that you were mentioning, and that's
Hmm.
the Leo or Leonardo DiCaprio Award, which you give an award not for your best performance because you haven't won one before. So it's like Leo and the Revenant. It's like a shitty performance, but because we've screwed up many times before, we're going to give it to you now.
Somewhere
Because
Kieran B is yelling at his computer screen.
As we do the Revenant next month on the show, we'll be talking Revenant very
ugh,
soon.
I mean, the entire film he's just grunting. Um,
Oh wow.
And getting completely raped and humped by a bear.
yeah,
Yeah.
but other than that, it was a great performance.
It was. It was actually a great performance. It's just not in his top 5.
No, and that's just it. And so I proposed that new category of I got the award simply because everybody says I screwed up before. It's you know yeah,
I
it's
like it.
kind of like James
It's
Stewart and the Philadelphia Story, etc.
Can I slightly change the award?
Okay.
Sure.
Let's make it the Al Pacino Award.
Ah,
Oh yes. Hooah!
I mean, Al Pacino has one of the great 4-year runs for an actor with Godfather, Serpico, Godfather 2, and Dog Day. He doesn't get a single actor nom. Particularly egregious for Godfather 2 since it went to Art Carney. But we win for when he comes back, when he's just full on like modern Pacino. She's got a great ass. And golly.
though I isn't there that famous story that Pacino told in Playboy magazine years ago where I think he was nominated one year and he was like he got really stoned before the show
Oh
and he
yeah.
was like begging. He's like, please don't call my name. I don't want to go up on stage. So I don't think Pacino ever cared that much about winning.
I think it was The Godfather. I think it was the first year they were there.
That's right. Yeah.
He got stoned and high because I think he was nominated in supporting and he wanted to be an actor.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So he was like really pissed off at the Oscars. So he got really high. But yes, I think I have heard that story.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, a couple other quick names that fell just below my radar. Tom, I had Irving Rapper as my number 6, so I think picking him as the winner is perfectly suitable there. I also have Ernst Lubitsch for To Be or Not to Be. I just think that's a kind of like you said, Dana. I like giving comedies awards because I think the Oscars have just criminally undervalued comedy, horror, a few of the sort of genres that aren't considered, the more dramatic stuff. I think To Be or Not to Be is a fantastic film. It's tight. It's got a good pace to it, and I think that a lot of that's owed to the director. Either of you guys have any directors you want to shout out real quick?
I had Curtiz as my number 6. I do think for a biopic, it's actually really engaging and entertaining. So I got to give him a lot of credit for that. I know that he's kind of undercut by most people think he's a one-trick pony for only having Casablanca, but this is at least another one where you could say theoretically he had some ability beyond just doing that one film where it all came together. George Stevens also did Woman of the Year. He was at my number 9. And I actually think Wake Island, for being a war film and kind of maybe one of the precursor war films of what we would kind of show as the prototype of World War II films.
Mm-hmm.
Had a lot in there that I thought was really good for special effects and the actual war sequences in there, especially in a time where I'm sure resources were scarce, as Dana mentioned before. To be able to do a film of that quality and that level of sophistication at that point, I thought was deserving of a lot of respect. I had some other that had a lot better emotional weight to the films ahead of him.
All right, well, you're going to have 4 different options for this particular category. The first time we've got 4 options for a category in this episode. You can go with Dana, who's got Mervyn Leroy for Random Harvest. You can go with my pick. I've got Orson Welles and the Magnificent Ambersons. You can go with Tom, who's got Irving Rapper in Now Voyager. Or you can go with the Academy, William Wyler and Mrs. Miniver. Really interesting 4 there. Be curious to see what the online community goes with.
I will make a prediction that mine will be dead last.
I would definitely agree with that sentiment for sure. I think I've got a pretty good chance just based on name recognition alone. I think Orson Welles has enough online. There's enough
you're
film
probably
going to
win that award, unless there's a lot of people that are like, no, preserve the Oscars. They probably got it right in 1942. I just have a hard time seeing many people not think that Orson Welles was robbed of an Oscar at some point.
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of banking on there. So, all right, Tom, trivia.
So what you're saying is you're playing to the fan vote?
There's always an element of strategery going on with me, yeah.
Well, on the same lines, William Wyler holds the record for most Best Director nominations ever with 12. I think he is now tied or maybe just one ahead of Martin Scorsese. But he only won 3 times. How many times was he nominated before he won for Mrs. Miniver?
Three.
That was like great, spot on synergy. It was 4. If you can name any of the films, I'll let you redeem yourselves.
Was Detective Story before 42?
Nope.
No.
Well, it might have been, but it wasn't one of the nominations.
One of the nominations, yeah. Nothing's coming to mind now.
No.
Okay. His first one was for 1936 Dodsworth.
Okay.
The second one is a film that Dana does not care for, but I think he is vastly underrating this film. 1939's Wuthering Heights, which I actually think is better than Mrs. Miniver.
Yeah, getting ready to get remade by Emerald Fennell coming up.
Yep. 1940, The Letter. 1941, The Little Foxes with Bette Davis.
Okay.
And then Mrs. Miniver. So he was 4 times in a row nominated, and this is the one where he finally received his Oscar.
Fascinating. Okay. All right. Well,
the only reason I don't like the movie Wuthering Heights is because I read the book, and
you're one of those people.
I read the book, and then I thought, okay, maybe the movie's better, and I didn't like the movie that much better than the book. So,
Olivier's fantastic in that movie. But okay.
It's been a long time since I've seen it, so I'll take your guys' opinion on wherever you stand on it.
Well, when we eventually come back for the 1939 version of the show,
I got 34 coming up next year, so we'll be continually
we won't be
going.
The oldest forever until we do 1927.
Oh Christ, no! I think Sarah over at Shea Cinema's already got lock on that one. So, oh my God! All right, well, let's get over to the big one. It's Best Picture. So the actual nominees for 1942 in Best Picture were 49th Parallel, King's Row, The Magnificent Ambersons, The Pied Piper, The Pride of the Yankees, Random Harvest, The Talk of the Town, Wake Island, Yankee Doodle Dandy, and the winner was once again Mrs. Miniver. Because this is a year with up to 10 nominations allowed at the actual ceremony, or at least what they nominated, which was 10, we're going to adhere to those rules, and we can nominate up to 10 depending on how many you deem worthy. I'm going to start us off on this round. Tom, you got something to say?
It was not up to 10, so you have to have 10.
You have to. Okay, well, good. I have 10. So
and I would assume, because I told you this morning that you had to have 10, that my co-host also has 10.
Okay.
I know this was difficult for you, Andrew. It was like pulling teeth, but you got 10. All right.
Yes, no, it sucks because literally on the last episode, I said anytime there's 10 nominations, I have no problem finding 10 worthy films. And I was put to the test immediately because there were barely 10 worthy films. But I made it there anyway. Again, if you're listening, I love movies from the 40s. 1942 just wasn't one of them. Sorry. Okay, so my Best Picture nominees for 42 are 49th Parallel, Gentleman Jim, The Magnificent Ambersons. First time we've mentioned it tonight, but The Murderer Lives at number 21, a really good international film I liked from that year. Now Voyager, There Was a Father, This Gun for Hire, To Be or Not to Be, another first-time name, Went the Day Well, and Woman of the Year. So those are my 10. And I've already given the movie multiple wins, so there's going to be no surprise what I'm going to say here. We're never going to get the actual Orson Welles version of the movie, but I think based on what Welles said himself, if the original version would have been released, he believes it was even greater than Citizen Kane, which has remained one of the cornerstone films in Hollywood history. But I think the 88-minute film is so rich in thematic weight. The acting's great. The directorial genius, I believe, is one of the most interesting things and ahead of its time. And I think we're at the point now where people need to look at the Magnificent Ambersons in the version we have and consider it alongside Citizen Kane and Casablanca and some of the best films of the 1940s. I think the Magnificent Ambersons is fantastic. I actually watched it 3 times during prep because I really wanted to feel the weight of the film. And I think at 88 minutes, it actually moves along at a really nice clip. I never get bored with it in all the time I've watched it. And again, the backstory I think is so fascinating. I think it's so criminal that we never got the Orson Welles version because, you know, like Tom, you had mentioned that people have kind of restored the film in their own kind of way. And Welles had talked with some scholars about what he was going to do with the movie. And I think it would have been a really interesting thing to see in its final version. But the version we got is still one that is by far the most interesting thing I saw in 1942. So it's my winner, Magnificent Ambersons. Tom, we'll go over to you now.
Okay. Number 10, I have Wake Island. This is kind of a respectful thing, given that, again, I think some of the war sequences in this were well ahead of their time. We're kind of flashing forward to a lot of the other war films we would see pretty close to this coming up. Number 9, I have Saboteur. Somewhat out of respect for Alfred Hitchcock, I don't think it's one of his best films. I don't think it's in his top maybe 15, but it's still a fairly well-directed film. The actors in it aren't particularly bad either. Like Bob Cummings and I can't think of her name at the moment. Priscilla Lane are also particularly good in this film. I do think it has some really good suspenseful sequences. The ending's decent. So I do think that it deserves to be up this high. Number 8, not a film that I particularly went out of my way to enjoy. I thought it was dragged a lot. It was slow in a lot of spots, but it ends well enough to deserve this spot. I have number 8, The Pride of the Yankees. 7, Woman of the Year. 6, Mrs. Miniver. 5, Yankee Doodle Dandy. 4, Random Harvest. 3, The Talk of the Town. 2, Now Voyager. And number 1, Gentleman Jim.
Wow.
I love
Tom,
Gentleman Jim.
You have shocked me, my friend.
I know.
I thought beforehand you were going to go Miniver. Then as this episode has gone along, I thought Now Voyager was definitely going to be your number 1. And you swerved there at the end with Gentleman Jim, which I love hearing because I am a huge advocate of that movie as well. You just watched it in the last couple of days, right? Like that was you have pretty fresh eyes on it.
I think it was the last movie I got in yesterday. I have watched roughly 10 films this weekend, just trying to get enough in for this episode to pay off. But I thought Errol Flynn is fantastic in the movie. I thought the boxing sequences, even though they pale in comparison to some of the modern stuff, like you're not going to get anything from like any of the Rocky franchise or Raging Bull as far as sound effects and some of the other things. But it's very fascinating to see kind of that early turn of the century look into a sport that I think captivated America for so long. And you have such a great charismatic lead. The stuff where he's interplaying with his brothers and his father, I think, is just engrossing. And he's such a great charismatic lead in this. But the point where, because I had this, I was about ready to finish the film and I was starting to put all of the stuff into my list. And I had this in at number 3 behind The Talk of the Town, or I guess that was actually today. So I had it at number 3 behind Random Harvest and Now Voyager. Now Voyager was going to be my number 1. But then you get that seed between him and Ward Bond at the end. And I'm just like, oh shit, this is number 1, isn't it? So that scene for me took it from an A to basically an A+ for this year. Like, it's not a 5-star movie for me, but it is definitely the one I would probably recommend the most. And then I think any of my top 5 I would recommend to anybody.
Yeah, it's shocking how few people have heard of Gentleman Jim. Like I said, considering, Pride of the Yankees is definitely the sports film from '42 that people think about, but they could not be more different, in my opinion, in terms of quality. I think Pride of the Yankees is a fine movie, good movie, whatever. I think Gentleman Jim's a great movie. So Love hearing you give that the win. Dana, what about you? What do you got for your best picture nominees and winner?
I have Talk of the Town. I have Pride of the Yankees. I have Saboteur. And with Saboteur, I would point out not just the acting in general, but Norman Lloyd was the heavy of that film. Do you remember what Norman Lloyd's last film was?
I do not.
Trainwreck.
Oh.
With Bill Hader and Amy Schumer.
Amy Schumer.
Yeah.
Jesus.
What kind of a career do you have when you are working with Alfred Hitchcock in 1942 and end with Amy Schumer in 2015?
Yeah, that's a fascinating journey. That's interesting.
Yes, he died at 106. He did the last film, I think, when he was 99. So, all right. I have Kings Row, Wake Island, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Random Harvest, The Magnificent Ambersons, Kings Row.
You already said that.
Excuse me. And then I'm sorry. And I have Mrs. Miniver. And quite frankly, I have to go with Mrs. Miniver because overall, I thought about it. I thought long and hard. I had at one point, I had Random Harvest. I had Kings Row. I had considered even going with Now Voyager, and I ultimately settled on Mrs. Miniver because at that time, it was the perfect movie for 1942.
Can I just say one small thing about Kings Row? I had it inside my top 10, so it was going to get a Best Picture nomination. And the ending is so contrived and neat that I had to drop it completely out of the top 10. I think it dropped 10 spots on that ending alone.
I have it at 26 out of 30 because of the ending. I find like it just like plummeted down my list when it got to the end. Yeah, it was way at the bottom.
If you take that ending out, I think people would think more highly of Ronald Reagan's performance in that film.
Well, it's not even so much as him, but it feels way too neat.
Mm-hmm.
Like you set up this great conundrum of a problem, and then you just solve it by like almost doing a Gordian knot.
It's Hollywood,
I guess.
Wow. I will say though, so you guys both had Miniver. You, Dana, you obviously had it winning. Tom, you had it in your top 10. I did not have it in my 10. It was my first cut, and I know I get some flack from people every now and then about my distaste for what actually wins Best Picture, and that's a fair criticism leveled at me, which I'll take. I actually don't think Miss Miniver is a bad film. Like I said, it was number 11 for me. I just don't think it's anywhere close to being considered one of the greatest films of all time, or even one of the greatest films of the 40s. It's just I think it has gotten lost in the shuffle, deservedly so, because I think it's just, again, I just don't think it has a lot of heft to it in the grand scheme of things. So I don't know. I thought Miniver was fine. That's kind of where I was with it. But I don't like when a Best Picture winner is fine, because by nature I'm going to be kind of bitter and sour towards a fine Best Picture winner, like a Coda or something. Which I love Coda. I think it's a great movie. It moved me, but I just don't think it's a Best Picture movie. And that's kind of where I'm at with Miniver. Tom, you okay with that?
Perfect Dana reaction. He takes a drink.
I
will say,
okay.
I don't have a problem with Mrs. Miniver. I think it's a decent enough, especially for the 40s Best Picture winner. Is it among the top Best Picture winners ever? No, I'm sure I could look it up on my list that I release annually of what I think are the Best Picture rankings, just generally. But I think if you take only the last scene away, you think it's probably better than it probably is. But now kind of watching it, because I think I last watched it about 4 years ago, so it might have been a pandemic watch. I just don't know. There's a lot of unnecessary fluff in this for me. There are certain scenes that just don't really need to be there. There's certain plot lines that just feel a little unnecessary, and I don't really get the point, other than speaking to a attitude or a feeling that they were collectively having at the time. And if that's what was going to win the award, like I don't fault that it won. It probably should have won, given what these films were all collectively about. It's the film that probably hits the heartstrings the most of what they were collectively all thinking. But is it the best film in hindsight? No. That's why it's my number 6. And I don't know if I would suggest it to everybody, because you have to have such context before you watch it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, well, you're going to have 3 different options when we get to the vote. You can go with Tom, who's got Gentleman Jim. You can go with myself. I've got Magnificent Ambersons. Or you can go with Dana and the Academy, who both have Mrs. Miniver. Tom, before we get to your trivia, though, let's quickly go to our predictions. I would just like to say I got 0 out of 6 for Tom. I had no clue what Tom was going to go with. And Dana, I got 2 out of 6 for you. I got your picture and your supporting actor. So I'll take it. I thought I was going to go 0 for 6 on both of you. So I'll take 2 out of 6.
If we're going on predictions, so I technically put down both Ozu and Wells, kind of hedging my bet for you for director, but I got Cotton as supporting actor, Moorhead for supporting actors, Flynn for actor. I'll kind of take a half point on the Wells, and I had Ambersons as your number 2 film. I had There Was a Father as the other predicted nominee.
Okay.
However, even though we tend to agree so much on our own show with each other, I am 0 for 6 with my father on predictions.
That's amazing.
I had Miniver as your number 2 film. That's the closest I got to any of them. I had you giving Teresa Wright for Mrs. Miniver, which apparently was very off. Oh, you know what? I got 1. I got Betty Davis. You gave Betty Davis the best actress, so I got 1. But I thought you'd have Hitchcock higher. Yeah. It was a poor performance. Now, I will say that of the and you would have to check me on this. So I predicted all 10 of your nominees for Best Picture, or tried to. So for Dana, I had The Pied Piper, which I don't think made it.
No.
Woman of the Year, I think, was in yours.
Yep.
Wake Island, I know, was in yours. Pride of the Yankees, Random Harvest, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Now Voyager. Was that in there?
Yes, it was.
I had Saboteur, Ambersons, and Miniver. So I think I got 9 out of your 10.
Yes.
What was the one I missed?
You had Pied Piper, and did you have Talk of the Town in there?
No. Okay, so that is the one that I missed. All right. And then for Andrew, I think I got most of yours, but I had Woman of the Year as your number 10. I had Random Harvest as your number 9. Miniver is 8, so that one obviously is wrong. I had To Be or Not to Be, which I think I got right for you. This Gun for Hire at 6. Gentleman Jim 5. Now Voyager 4. Murderer Lives at number 21 at 3. Ambersons 2, and There Was a Father as your number 1.
So you got 8 out of 10. That's pretty solid. You didn't get 49th Parallel, which I'm still confounded by, but I had a fun time with it. And I think it's because it was the first watch for this one, and I hadn't sat through a bunch of other war films, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of different." It was different enough to stand out. That's about all I can say about 49th Parallel.
Okay.
All right, well, Tom, you got any trivia for us before we jump into
All
our
right.
lingering questions?
I have one last one, and this is probably pretty straightforward, but Mrs. Miniver was the most nominated and winningest film of 1942. But which films were second in nominations and wins on the night?
Pride of the Yankees was second nominations.
Correct. It had 11. It also didn't win more than, I think, one award.
Yeah.
I'm guessing Random Harvest.
So no.
No.
There's only one other movie that won multiple times that evening.
Let's see.
Was there a Disney film that year?
Yankee Doodle?
Yes, Yankee Doodle Dandy for best score.
Hmm.
Let's see here. What else?
Best
Best
actor.
sound recording and best actor.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got a few lingering questions. Fortunately, the listeners had some mercy on us and they didn't put us through 14 or 15 of them, but we've got some. So we'll get to those lingering questions for anyone who might still be listening to this 2 hours.
Oh, the cat people questions are coming.
All right. So first question is from the reigning question queen herself, Heather Stewart, good friend of the show on all the socials. She didn't disappoint this month. She asked us to recast the 2 leads of The Black Swan into 2010's Black Swan film. So if you're unfamiliar, The Black Swan is a swashbuckling pirate tale starring Tyrone Power and Maureen O'Hara. Tom, I know you did not watch The Black Swan. Dana, probably also not
No.
The Black Swan. Okay, I only watched this stupid movie because I had to, because Heather sent this question. So thanks for that, Heather. I mean, it's relatively easy to answer this question because we're talking about Tyrone Power and Maureen O'Hara, so you basically have one male and one female character. If I was to throw them into Black Swan, the Darren Aronofsky film, I would say O'Hara would play the Natalie Portman role, and then Power would play the Vincent Castle role of the dance instructor. And I'm gonna curse Heather for this question. So, damn you, Heather, for making me watch The Black Swan. Okay, we've got another from Heather. She said Casablanca got a limited release in 1942, as we've already talked about, but because it was only released widely in 43, it qualified for that following year and obviously won. What Oscars do you think Casablanca would have won if it would have been in 1942's eligibility? What do you guys think? Do you think Casablanca would have usurped Mrs. Miniver, given the state of the world and anything like that?
No.
No. Tom, Dana, what about you? Do you think Casablanca?
I'm not so sure. But then again, you have to stop and think. I mean, it was the 42 release and such. I mean, when you study the history of it, Roosevelt asked for a private screening in the White House because that was where they were contemplating doing the first conference with he and Churchill was in Casablanca. So he brought the film in, watched it, and then said, "Yeah, okay, we'll do it there." And talking about a bonanza for marketing, was all the newsreels. But still, boy, I think it was much more American than Miniver.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that there was a large backlash among, like Hedda Hopper had a problem. Like, we can't even nominate a film that's American based. I I think it might have actually been competitive with Miniver. I think it probably could have beaten it simply because your primary characters in the film were were Americans living within that confines of standing up to the Nazis, and I think it would have potentially had a much more meaningful connection with the Academy.
You may have swayed me on that, Dana, because my initial thought was no, because all Casablanca won was Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, and I'm thinking if you just transport it into 42, would it have won any of those three? And my initial thought was no, but you might be onto something there. Maybe, I mean, it probably would have been a 50-50 coin flip, honestly. I mean, I think would have had a shot. You don't think so, Tom?
Not at all. Again, I'm with you that because it got very limited nominations. I mean, it was nominated for Best Actor, but Bogart does not win. It was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Claude Rains, but he did not win. You got director, screenplay, and a screenplay that was kind of like being put together as the film was taking place. It feels like a best of the a mediocre year. I mean, you complain about 1942. I have a feeling 43 is terrible. I mean, just some
Hopefully
of the
we're not going to
films
do that anytime soon.
In Which We Serve, the human comedy Madame Curie, The More the Merrier, a George Stevens film, the Oxbow Incident, which feels like another like biopic type of thing, The Song of Bernadette, and Watch on the Rhine, which Paul Lucas wins over Bogart for Casablanca. Where in there is like a bunch of other classic films that you can really point to and say, oh, clearly this was the thing. But it seemed to win out because it was a sentimental favorite. It was a good movie. I just don't think it holds quite the sway that Miniver was going to overall, given the fact that there were several other American films nominated in 42 for war pictures that got no grandiose love in the way that Miniver did.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Heather has redeemed herself from the previous question about the Black Swan. So,
but the
Well,
problem
only in your
with
eyes.
your argument, Tom, is 43. The problem came in with the fact that so much of Hollywood was tied up in the films. You had Stevens, you had Capra, you had Ford, you had Weiler, you had Houston, all overseas doing documentary films for the War Department. You had Clark Gable flying B-20 or B-17 Liberators over Germany during the war. You had James Stewart.
It's still neither here nor there. That
You
makes
just
it
didn't have the same level of directors and actors available.
That still is neither here nor there, because the fact that it only wins 3 awards for a film that's clearly substantially better than the rest of these, to me says it didn't have the sentimental favoritism that it should have had. And in years later, we've subsequently come back to it and said, wow, this is a really great film.
But by 1943's Academy, or the Academy Awards in early 1943, we had become less patriotic. We had become more comatose to the war because things had not gone as well as we had hoped. We were making slow progress in the Pacific. We had no idea of when the invasion in Europe was going to take place. We had slugged it out in North Africa, into Sicily, into Italy, and were stalemated by the early part of 43. And so I think there was just a general fatigue of war by the time Casablanca came up that year. And I think if it would have been earlier during a more patriotic, rah-rah America time frame, it would have gotten more nominations and would have done better in the Academy Awards.
well, what I'm going to do is I'm definitely going to clip this little section question right here, and I'm going to throw it up on social media because I think this will be an interesting question for the public. Because I could talk myself into either answer, but I'm inclined to say it would have had some trouble against Miniver.
If you put it to a social media vote, it won't matter. Casablanca will win 90% to 10%.
That's true.
Because it's just the superior film.
That's true.
Like, that's not in question. It's which film would have won given the context of the years that it was in. And I don't think that the general public is looking into it in the same way that we are. or at least film Twitter is not.
I'm going to put it up anyway and just see what the film community spits back at me. So we've got
right,
one more
report on the next episode.
Is Dana all full of crap, or is it Tom that's full of crap?
That's not the question. Because
that will be the question. Of
course you're going to get it, because you're like the friendly uncle. You get to be the silly character and the one who's much more charismatic. I have to be the one who reins you in. So, of course, the disciplinarian. Yes. You get to be Jack Nicholson. I get to be Nurse Ratched in this scenario. We both get our acting
you in
Oscars,
a white
but...
uniform like that. Ugh.
All right, well, we got
time
one
for
more
your sponge bath.
We've got it's time for cat people. So here we go with cat people. This whole question went off the rails on social media, and I was just watching it go. But Heather came back a third time, and she asked, what would cat people look like if it had been directed by Cats director extraordinaire Tom Hooper? That's Academy Award-winning director Tom Hooper of Cats. Not that he won for Cats, but he won anyway. What do you think cat people would have looked like if it was directed by Tom Hooper?
I don't even know how to answer this.
The cheesiest musical that you could have ever possibly done.
See, I'm trying to picture cat people and like the King's Speech merged, because I feel like Tom Hooper's filmography is much more like British, kind of dry, and I'm trying to picture cat people in that lane.
Is there a like early horror British film that's got like some supernaturalness to it?
Nothing that's really coming to mind. I don't know. I'm also picturing cat people with like Taylor Swift and James Corden.
No, I was thinking Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but with cats.
There you go. That's what it would be, apparently.
Yeah, okay.
You win. To build on that exact same question, Sarah Shea over at Shea Cinema had to also chime in. She asked us what cat people would look like if it was directed by Tobe Hooper, who did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist, which is a whole different scenario. And, I actually think Cat People as a low-budget horror film in the 70s would actually have been kind of interesting. So I'm here for Cat People with Tobe Hooper.
Except it was done during the 80s.
Yeah, I don't know. I could have gotten behind that one.
I think it would have looked like an episode of South Park.
I don't watch enough horror to be able to really adequately answer this question. All I can say is that it would have probably been like some weird niche audience that would be like watching this at midnight on some random theater for a film festival in like Boulder, Colorado.
It would have been on like Elvira's TV show back in the day when Elvira used to have late night, midnight shows.
The question I have is when would this have been released? Would this have been released in the 70s or in the 1940s?
Probably late 70s.
Okay.
Mid 70s.
I don't know. Is the second feature in a Rocky Horror Picture
Festival? There you go. Yeah. It would have definitely been low budget, soaked in blood. I think I would have been... Sign me up for Tobe Hooper's Cat People, not Tom Hooper's Cat People. That's all I'll say about that. So Sarah Shea's back again with another question. She asked, what's the best song in Yankee Doodle Dandy? Do you have a favorite?
The one that has been stuck in my head now since I finished it has been Over There. But there are much more easily recognizable songs from that. Obviously, Yankee Doodle Dandy and that Grand Old Flag or Grand Old Flag. Those are much more recognizable. But Over There, I forgot he had written it and that it was a part of the film, but it's so catchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say Give My Regards to Broadway is probably the one on the soundtrack that stands out to me.
Yeah, I actually happened to see a Cohan Broadway musical that was revised and updated and see it on Broadway with Matthew Broderick in it a few years ago. It was quite entertaining, actually.
Even with Matthew Broderick.
Yeah,
Hey,
well, I
now.
won't discuss the meeting of Matthew Broderick after the performance.
I'm just getting to his personal feelings on Matthew Broderick, not his performance in the seminal 80s comedy
Yeah.
Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, I won't get into the specifics, at least on air. So
That'll be
anyway.
it for an Ask Dana Anything.
Sure. Yeah, that would be a good one because I've met a ton of celebrities. And ask me about some of those because I would love to tell you some stories.
Given that we
about some
don't
of
have
them.
any questions for Wednesday, and
I'm taking note of this for my appearance in a couple of days. Yes. Okay, well, Sarah had another Yankee Doodle Dandy question because she just was in a Yankee Doodle Dandy mood. Is this kind of touched upon something Tom talked about earlier? She said, "Is Cagney more suited to light comedic musical roles such as this, or is he more suited for the darker gangster roles like in Public Enemy?" I'll quickly say I think he's fine in the light comedic stuff, but I think of him in White Heat, Roaring Twenties, Angels with Dirty Faces. That's the Cagney I sort of was raised on by my dad and stuff, so I'm always going to kind of gravitate towards those. But Tom, you made a good argument earlier about why his lighter stuff works for you.
Let me throw something out. Think of him in a role that he did not perform in, which was the Robert Preston role as Henry Hill in
The Music Man.
The Music Man. Could you see Cagney in that performance? I could.
Yeah, I suppose I could.
Yeah.
Although I really love Robert Preston in that film, so it's hard for me to see anybody else.
Robert.
But, okay.
Yeah, Robert Preston's movie career kind of fizzled out, and so he went to Broadway and then did that, and then went back to Hollywood as a result of it. So, but yeah. But again, I think that's probably the case. I think he had it's one of the reasons why I said that Fred McMurray was wasted doing comedic roles and doing the flubber and all that, because he was such a nice guy. He gave the appearance of always such a wonderful person, like a normal neighbor, like somebody that you'd love to have sit down and have a drink with, play golf with, whatever. But he had this sinister streak in him that if they turned around and said, "Oh yeah, he embezzled $150,000 from his employer," you'd go, "Oh yeah, I can see that." And I think Cagney has some of that same quality where he would be the friendly guy that you'd know and you talk to, and then they'd go, "Oh yeah, and he's also been working as a loan shark." Oh yeah, okay, I got that too.
Fits the bill, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're going to have another question from Sarah. She brought a sports question, which ties things nicely back into past episodes and some of Tom's infamous questions of the past. So, where would you rank The Pride of the Yankees among other baseball films?
Okay, so she did limit it just to baseball films.
Just talking baseball films. Where's Pride
It
of the
does
Yankees?
not crack the top 20.
That's bold. Okay. I like the boldness
There's
of that
so many
take.
baseball films. Sandlot, Bull Durham, Major League, Field of Dreams. I would put Little Big League ahead of Pride of the Yankees.
Damn right.
I mean, it's just not that entertaining, and it's kind of more of a biopic. It doesn't focus a lot on the actual baseball or the sports aspect of it. I have The Natural. I have I'm trying to think there are just a lot of baseball movies, so it's hard to put this. I would put 61 ahead of it.
Mm-hmm. Dana, what about you?
I wouldn't even rank it as one of the better Yankee. Well, it's better than at least one Yankee film, because 8 years later, after Babe Ruth died, William Bendix played Babe Ruth. Yeah.
Was he better than John Goodman as Babe Ruth?
No, actually not.
Okay.
If you saw that film, and I can't even remember what it's called, maybe it's the Babe Ruth story. It's not a good film. And I think it was just basically trying to figure out, okay, we did one for Lou Gehrig, so let's do one for the Babe. And let's find an actor that looks kind of big and chunky and put him in and see what happens. And so Bendix played that part. And I've watched that film, and I'm like, this
Okay.
makes Pride of the Yankees look like, like one of the best films of all time. So
Just to throw out a few more here. Okay. Angels in the Outfield, Rookie of the Year, A League of Their Own, Moneyball, The Rookie, all better than Pride of the Yankees. I will say Pride of the Yankees is better than Major League 2.
Yeah, okay.
I'll side with you on that one. Yeah, so
Caddyshack 2.
Yes. I've
That's
got
not a baseball film, but
Bad News Bears.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The original.
Yeah, definitely not the Billy Bob.
Ugh.
And I would much rather watch, even though it's not a better film, but I'd much rather watch The Benchwarmers than Pride of the Yankees again.
That's got to be near and dear to you, Tom.
I think over the years, Pride of the Yankees just continually like slips in stature. I mean, it's so outdated at this point. I've got 2 tiers of baseball movies for Sarah. I've got my Mount Rushmore, which is Field of Dreams, League of Their Own, Bull Durham, and Little Big League. Actually, it's The Sandlot, but Little Big League's just near and dear to my heart. But there's also 8 Men Out, 61, Moneyball, Major League, Natural, Everybody Wants Some, Bad News Bears, 42. There's a plethora of amazing baseball films that are both serious and then like kid friendly that Tom and I grew up on. And so there's probably 25 movies I'd rather watch baseball related over Pride of the Yankees. So it's nice to see we're all kind of in line with that one for sure. And we've got one more from Sarah Shea, and this one has several parts to it.
Oh, a multi-parter.
Okay.
So
A multi-parter.
we waited until this is the last question so that it wasn't the last question. It was the last questions.
Yes, and I feel like I'm going to have to contribute the most to this gosh darn question.
Oh, yeah.
Road to Morocco was the third road picture with Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. And it was nominated for Oscars for Best Writing, Original Screenplay, and Sound Recording. First question, did any of us manage to watch this during prep? Tom? Dana? Negative. No. I watched this for Sarah. I did not enjoy it. Her next question was, have any of us seen any of the other road pictures? And if you have, where would you rank Morocco among them? In total, there's 7. There's Singapore, Zanzibar, Morocco, Utopia, Rio, Bali, and Hong Kong. Dana, I feel like of the 3 of us in this room right now, you're the one that's maybe seen the most of these.
I've seen most of them.
Okay.
It's been a while because most of the time this is, when I'm a kid and I'm thinking these are funny, which I don't think I would find to be the case anymore.
Does one stand out to you as like, or are they all just so blended together that you can't?
I couldn't tell you what one scene would be from one film or whatever. They were very cookie cutter. They were just churning them out because they were making a ton of money. They were just, and that's, and after the first one, Hope and Crosby held out and said, we're not doing them unless we get a cut. They were one of the first to get a cut of the gross. And that's where they made their millions. In fact, when they were doing Road to Morocco, Hope looks at this and he's going, He says, let's renegotiate. So he made a deal that all the sand from the film had to be delivered to his home so he could make a 3-hole golf course.
That's amazing.
And they used it for sand traps because he said it was the best sand he'd ever seen.
Oh, did you know?
I remember that from his biography I read.
Tom, have you seen any of the road films?
Not a one.
Okay. This would be 1 of 7 for me. And it sucked. It was terrible. It was and that's not I'm not knocking Bob Hope. I'm not knocking Bing Crosby.
I will.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to take shots
not
at him.
funny anymore.
Let me put it
at
this
the
way.
time, it probably made sense, but it's so aged out in comedy. It's just going to be hard for anybody with a modern aesthetic to think it's at all funny. Like, I'm surprised when I went back and, as many Marx films are on like the greatest films of all time. I thought for sure that would be an absolute slog. And I still find those funny, but that's like such a rare mirage in the desert compared to anything else from this time period of what everybody thinks is funny, because it's so slapstick, it's so one-liner, it's so cliche that we have such a graduated sense of comedy and humor at this point, and I am a comedy snob. So Bob Hope just does not do it.
Well, and Bob Hope, when he first did his radio show, he's the one who created the opening monologue. So every television show, every talk show that has an opening monologue takes their cue from Bob Hope. If you listen to the old radio shows from the late 30s into the 40s, they're just not that funny. They're all little goofy one-liners that most people, I mean, you hear better jokes from your barber at this point in time. And I just don't understand exactly why they're so, but the most, at least during my lifetime, the one film that tried to recreate that road picture was a film that got deadpanned by critics horribly, that I think if you went back and watched is not as bad as the critics said. And that's Ishtar.
I have not watched Ishtar in ages.
If you go back and watch it now, after you've watched Road to Morocco, you will find that Ishtar tried to capitalize on that Hope Crosby buddy road picture mentality. And actually, I don't think the chemistry in the film was that bad. I don't think the film was that unfunny. It wasn't funny, but it was not as bad as all the critics said.
On a different note, just for as far as we've graduated from comedy, the 50th anniversary of SNL is supposed to be next year, like early in the spring, I think. Go back and watch the original pilot, because I tried to, and as much as I like George Carlin, that was awful. Like the only thing that holds up for just about anything before about the 90s for me as far as comedy is anything Eddie Murphy was in.
Yeah.
Outside of that, nothing works.
Oh, there are a few skits that are funny. And I take great pride in the fact that I'm happening to sit at home on a Saturday night, and I watched the first episode of Saturday Night Live when it was first broadcast, and in 1975. And I watched the entire first season. So I'm going to school and I'm quoting lines from Saturday Night Live, and all the other kids are like, "What are you doing? What the heck? What are you?" Because I was on it before everybody else. Now I went back a few years ago and tried to watch that first season. I'm like, what the hell? What? This was funny when I watched it. Now it's terrible.
Only you would turn sitting home and lack of a social life in 1975 into a humble brag.
I was 11.
And
a Saturday night at 10:30 at 11? You were out a lot?
Okay.
Sure.
And we have one final component of this question, which is, Sarah asked, are Crosby and Hope the greatest comedic duo in film history? And could any other buddy films exist today without them? I would say that they are integral in the history of the buddy cop genre. I always was more of like an Abbott and Costello guy, personally. Like that's what my dad raised me on. And then I kind of went from Abbott and Costello to like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. And my dad was like big into Cheech and Chong. He was a hippie from that era. And so like that's kind of what so my avenue of comedic buddies was a little different, which is how I ended up on like Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly and Mathau and Lemon, and there's so many other options for me that Hope and Crosby don't really register for me.
Mathau and Lemon's a good one. I'll throw out another one from this year that I think is superior, but it's in a slightly different form of comedy, and that'd be romantic comedy. Hepburn and Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I have to say, what was the year the first Hope and Crosby film was released? Because
No
Abbott
idea.
and Costello did Buck Privates, I believe, in 40. So the question is who was first?
Who's on first?
Ah,
That's a good question. I always, like I said, my dad always just kind of taught me that Abbott and Costello were the first, but I've never really
well,
fact
and
checked it or traced
they
it.
were huge on radio before that.
Mm-hmm.
So Road to Singapore was the first one from 1940.
Okay, so I actually think Abbott and Costello was first.
Yeah, that's kind of the direction I would lean.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein as well before that.
I'll say I like Bing Crosby and Bob Hope more than Dwayne The Rock Johnson and Kevin Hart. I'll put them ahead of that buddy comedy duo, but I don't have a ton of reverence for Hope and Crosby. That's just for my taste. All right, and we have one final question. Last, certainly not least, buddy of the show, Seth Vargas over at Movie Friends Podcast, who's going to be appearing next year, asked, is To Be or Not to Be the tightest written comedy of all time? And I'm going to give you some additional context. I went to Seth's Letterboxd page and pulled his review. He said, when he reviewed the movie, he said, is this the greatest written comedy of all time? Impeccable. A ballet on barbed wire, and the dancer never cuts their feet. Every part of this works to the best version of what it could be. I have a new movie to recommend to every human being I meet. Now, I certainly don't have that much love the way Seth does for it. I had a really good time with To Be or Not to Be. Do you think it's the best written comedy of all time? If not, what do you have up there in that lofty air?
It's hard to think of one off the cuff. I will say, out of the 21 films that I have on my list, To Be or Not to Be is my 20th. I did not care for the film at all.
Wow, okay.
I thought it was not funny. I thought it was way too slapsticky. I didn't care for Jack Benny at all. I thought if there were a redeeming quality in the movie, it was Carol Lombard. But outside of that, the notion of this troupe somehow getting involved in geopolitics made no sense to me. And it's hard to put too many other things, either from modern comedy or previously, in over the top of it as far as writing, because, for example, we mentioned the Marx Brothers. A lot of their stuff is improvised or stuff that they were doing in the moment, so that's not really written. And a lot of the modern comedies are also ad-libbed. So they're delivering lines that aren't necessarily written or part of the script. They're just giving multiple takes of the same thing. So that's not really written. So it's hard to put something else in there. I guess what you define as a comedy is also kind of difficult, but I'll go with The Odd Couple.
It's a good
because
one.
I do think that's creating kind of an aesthetic, but that was an adaptation from a play. But as far as the modern like roommate comedies, that kind of owes everything to that particular film. And I actually think it does somewhat hold up, even if it now feels very dated compared to the stuff that's come after it.
Yeah, I mean, when Seth sent the question over, when I thought in my mind, tightest comedy, the first thing that came to my mind was His Girl Friday from 1940. I think that one is just like, it's just like lightning quick. It's just boom, boom, boom. It's just, it's all about the script and the pace and the flow. And then the second one will be a little bit of a callback to a previous episode with Tom and myself. It's sort of now regarded as one of the most like perfect scripts in modern comedy, and I'm talking about The Big Lebowski, which is one of the great comedies of all time. I think The Big Lebowski is so specific and just like, it's tight, it's perfect. So those are the two that kind of stood out to me. Dana, what about you?
Well, first of all, have either of you seen the remake of To Be or Not to Be that was done by Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft?
No, I'm intrigued by it though. I'm a huge Mel Brooks guy.
Yeah, he did it. And the other question I had is, in thinking about that, has anybody ever thought about the fact of how to be or not to be, or the basic underlying premise of what took place and how they ultimately try to end up, destroying Hitler. Has anybody ever thought about asking Tarantino if his idea for Inglorious Bastards is somewhat based on that? Because they seem parallel to me.
It's interesting.
That's another idea that I hadn't considered, but is Pulp Fiction a comedy and therefore eligible for this? Because I think that might be in consideration.
Now, to me, when I first saw it, the film that I thought was the tightest comedy, if your definition of a comedy is joke after joke after joke and everything was funny and nothing in it was at all serious, is Airplane.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time I had ever seen a film where it wasn't just, here's a film, we're talking and we're doing the dialogue and whatever, and, oh, here's a joke a little later, and here's another joke, ha ha ha. Everything in this was a joke. And in fact, there were jokes within jokes that if you watch it a second time, you pick up on stuff that you missed the first time because you listened to the line instead of watching the actors or how it was shot and realized there was another joke that contained within there. To me, when I first saw it, it was the most original thing I'd ever seen. And it changed my definition of comedy and how I viewed comedy from that point forward.
The Airplane of sports movies, I will nominate Dodgeball.
Pretty darn close.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I wouldn't say To Be or Not to Be is one I'm going to go back and watch anytime soon. I definitely appreciate Seth being a big fan of it. It just didn't click with me on the level of some of like the great comedies that I've come across in my life, but solid comedy nonetheless. That is going to do it, though, for this recording. But again, this is only the beginning. Now that our picks have been made, it will ultimately be up to you, the fans, to decide what goes into the Almanac as the true winners. We're going to be putting up social media polls across 4 platforms in the coming days, and we need your votes to be cast. The more places you follow the page, the more opportunities you have to vote. Before we sign off, though, let's talk a little bit about what's still to come in 2024. Tom, this episode is going to go up the first Friday in September. That's September 6th. So what do you and Dana have in store for everyone over at Gmote over the next month?
So I'm glad that you asked. We are going to be, we will have released at this point just for August so people can catch up. These episodes will already be out, but we have an episode of The Sixth Sense coming early in August. Then we have Do the Right Thing Revisited, which yours truly, for your show host here, will be a part of. We also have The Life of Brian. That will be coming up with the Question Queen, Heather Stewart, and also another great guest from California. We then will be recording our 225th episode. We always promise to do one of the big movies for that. We are doing The Maltese Falcon. So we have that on tap. And then we do have our return guests from our live post-Oscars ceremony for the All the President's Men. We are revisiting with Betsy and Trent from...
Fascinating. Oh, never seen it?
Never Seen It.
I'm going to have to be very careful around that episode because Betsy and Trent will be on this show next summer, and they're going to be doing 1976. And so I'm hoping they don't tip their hand too much to where they stand on President's Men. But I feel like I'll have to listen to that for Scooby-Doo purposes for people on the inn.
I was told when they scheduled the episode that Trent has a lot of President's Men thoughts.
Okay, good. I'm excited to hear that, and I'm excited to hear them. I'm also really looking forward to joining you guys by the time this episode will be up. Like you said, Do the Right Thing will be out. I'm getting amped up for that one here in a couple days. And look out for the upcoming 10th episode of this show in October, where I'm going to be joined by 2 returning guests. I have author V.P. Morris, who was on 1954 episode in March. And I've got Adam St. John of 1001 by 1 and Below Freezing, who featured on the 1994 episode in July. We're going to be covering the 2015 year in film which is the year that Spotlight took down Ex Machina, Inside Out, Mad Max Fury Road, Sicario, and many other films. You can find this show on Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Threads, TikTok, and Facebook at Rev Almanac. There's going to be timestamps on every category in case you need to go back and listen to a certain part as you think about your vote, as well as a link to Tom and Dana's show and their website so you can keep up with everything these two fine gentlemen are doing. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did. It's been an interesting few hours diving into 1942, and we'll see you guys in December.
Sounds good.
December.
Yes.
Just a note of caution for anyone else who's a masochist. Don't do 2 back-to-back months on this show. Just don't do it.
Try 12 back-to-back.
You're a crazy person who just got like 354 movies over the weekend in physical media. I don't want to talk about how sick you are as a human being that you're watching this many movies, buying this many movies, consuming this many movies. You're going to hit the 1,000 mark for the year, and it's just going to be... you need help.
Yeah, I don't know if I should be in awe or in sympathy.
Well, it's a good thing you specialize in disability, Dana, because whenever I have to get on disability for my sickness, I can call you up.
Yeah, because I know how much effort it took to get the 23 movies I watched in, and I can't imagine doing, that and doing it on a consistent basis each month.